Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote western region of Maryland, near the Savage River State Forest. The crackling fire cast long shadows across our campsite as night settled over the dense woodland. My girlfriend, Olivia, and I had been planning this trip for months, a week-long hiking adventure through the Savage River State Forest. We both needed to escape the suffocating pressure of our corporate jobs in Baltimore, and this remote wilderness seemed like the perfect remedy. "Do you think we're far enough from the trail?" Olivia asked, her voice slightly tense as she arranged our sleeping bags inside the tent. "We're good," I assured her, poking at the campfire with a stick. "Nobody comes this deep into the forest, especially this time of year." It was mid-October, and the forest was ablaze with autumn colors. Crimson, gold, and burnt orange leaves carpeted the forest floor. The temperature had dropped considerably since sunset, and my breath now formed small clouds in the chilly air. We had hiked nearly 7 miles off the main trail that day, following an old, barely visible path that wasn't marked on any of our maps. Olivia had been hesitant, but I'd convinced her that finding our own way would make the experience more authentic. Now, watching her silhouette move inside our tent, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret for dragging her so far from civilization. "Hey, did you hear that?" Olivia froze, her head tilted toward the darkness beyond our campfire's glow. I listened. At first, there was only the typical forest symphony, rustling leaves, the occasional snap of a twig from nocturnal creatures, and the gentle whisper of wind through the canopy above. But then I heard it, a faint melodic humming that seemed to weave through the trees. "Probably just the wind," I said, though the sound didn't match any wind pattern I'd ever heard. It had a distinctly human quality to it, like a woman singing a lullaby from a great distance. Olivia emerged from the tent, wrapping her arms around herself. "That's not the wind, Michael. It sounds like singing." "Maybe other campers?" I suggested, though I knew it was unlikely. We hadn't seen another soul since leaving the ranger station yesterday morning. The humming grew slightly louder, then faded, as if the source was moving through the forest around us. I reached for our flashlight, sweeping the powerful beam in a wide arc around our campsite. The light caught nothing but trees and undergrowth. "Let's just finish dinner and get some sleep," I said, trying to sound casual. "We've got that ridge hike tomorrow." Olivia nodded, but I could see she was unsettled. We ate our freeze-dried pasta in silence, both straining to hear any further sounds from the forest. The humming had stopped, but somehow the silence felt more oppressive. Later, zipped tightly in our sleeping bags, Olivia whispered, "Michael, do you know anything about the history of these woods?" "Not much," I admitted. "Why?" "I was reading that guidebook while you were setting up the tent. There's a section about local legends. Apparently there's a story about a woman called the Whispering Widow who roams these forests." I chuckled, though it sounded forced even to my own ears. "Seriously? You're buying into campfire tales now?" "The book said she was accused of witchcraft back in the 1800s. The locals drove her into the forest and she supposedly died out here. They say she still wanders around, singing to lure hikers deeper into the woods." "And then what? She eats them?" I teased, hoping to lighten the mood. Olivia didn't laugh. "It said she collects their voices." "Well, my voice is staying right here in my throat. Thank you very much," I said, pulling her closer. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be better." But sleep came fitfully that night. I drifted in and out of consciousness, jolted awake by every snapping twig and rustling leaf. In the liminal space between wakefulness and dreams, I could have sworn the humming returned, closer this time, circling our tent like a curious predator. When dawn finally broke, I felt exhausted. Olivia looked no better, dark circles under her eyes as she boiled water for our instant coffee. "Did you hear it all night?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Probably just an owl or something. Sound carries strangely in forests." She didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. We packed up camp efficiently, eager to start moving. According to my trail map, we could reach Poplar Lick by evening if we maintained a steady pace. There was a proper campground there, not exactly crowded this time of year, but at least we wouldn't be completely alone. The day started promisingly. The weather was perfect for hiking, cool but not cold, with dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. The forest was breathtaking, with massive old-growth trees towering above us, their trunks twisted and gnarled with age. Under different circumstances, I would have been stopping every few minutes to take photos. Around noon, we reached a small clearing where a stream cut through the forest floor. It was an ideal spot for lunch, so we dropped our packs and sat on a fallen log. "The GPS signal's gone," Olivia said, frowning at her phone. "And I had 3 bars earlier." I pulled out my own phone to check. No signal. And worse, the compass app was behaving strangely, the needle spinning in continuous circles. "That's weird," I muttered, tapping the screen. "Maybe there's some kind of magnetic interference around here." "From what? We're in the middle of nowhere." I didn't have an answer for that. "Let's just use the paper map. Old-school navigation." But as I unfolded our map, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. The landmarks didn't match what we were seeing. According to the map, we should have crossed a fire road about 2 miles back, but I couldn't recall seeing anything like that. "Michael," Olivia's voice was tight. "Where exactly are we?" "We're fine," I said automatically, though uncertainty was creeping in. "We just need to backtrack a bit. We probably missed a turn." She looked at me, her expression hardening. "You don't know where we are, do you?" Before I could respond, a drop of water hit my map. Then another. I looked up at the sky, previously clear blue, now rapidly darkening with heavy clouds that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. "Storm's coming," I said, hastily folding the map. "We need to find shelter." The rain started in earnest as we hurried to put on our rain gear, not the gentle patter of a normal shower, but a sudden, violent downpour that drummed against the forest canopy like impatient fingers. The temperature plummeted, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees. "This way," I shouted over the storm, pointing to a denser part of the forest where the canopy might provide some cover. Olivia nodded, pulling her hood tighter around her face. We trudged through increasingly muddy terrain, the path, if it had ever been a path at all, completely lost now. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees growing impossibly closer together, their branches reaching out like arthritic fingers. Then, through the curtain of rain, I spotted a structure, a small cabin nestled among the trees. "Look," I grabbed Olivia's arm, pointing. "Shelter." She squinted through the downpour. "Are you sure? I don't see anything." "Right there," I insisted, pulling her forward. "Come on, before we're completely soaked." As we approached, the cabin came more clearly into view. It was old, clearly abandoned for decades, its wooden walls weathered gray, windows clouded with grime or broken entirely. A sagging porch wrapped around the front, and a stone chimney, partially collapsed, rose from the far end. "Michael, I don't think we should—" Olivia began, but another crash of thunder drowned out her words. I climbed the creaking porch steps and tried the door. To my surprise, it swung open easily, as if recently used. The interior was dark but dry, and that was all that mattered at the moment. "Come on," I urged, holding the door open for Olivia. She hesitated, then reluctantly stepped inside. The cabin consisted of a single room with a small fireplace, a rickety table with one chair, and a narrow bed frame with no mattress. Dust coated every surface, but strangely, there were areas where it had been disturbed. A clear patch on the table, footprints on the floor. "Someone's been here recently," Olivia whispered, her eyes scanning the room. "Probably just other hikers seeking shelter," I reasoned, though the footprints looked smaller than an adult's, almost child-sized. "Let's get a fire going. I'm freezing." There was a small stack of firewood beside the fireplace, and to my relief, it was dry enough to catch. Soon, a modest fire was crackling, casting dancing shadows around the cabin's interior. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows, wind moaning through gaps in the walls. As we huddled by the fire attempting to dry our soaked clothes, I noticed Olivia staring at something on the wall above the fireplace. "What is it?" I asked, following her gaze. It was a crude carving in the wood, a stick figure of a woman with elongated arms and what appeared to be hair flowing in the wind. Beneath it were carved symbols I didn't recognize, except for one that looked distinctly like the protection runes I'd seen in a book about ancient folklore. "I don't like this place," Olivia said quietly. "As soon as the rain lets up, we should leave." I nodded in agreement, though a part of me was reluctant to head back into the storm-ravaged forest. At least here we had shelter and fire. As daylight faded, the cabin grew increasingly eerie. The fire cast long shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames, and the wind through the broken windows sometimes sounded disturbingly like whispers. We laid our sleeping bags on the floor near the fire, neither of us willing to sleep on the ancient bed frame in the corner. "Try to get some sleep," I told Olivia, squeezing her hand. "I'll keep the fire going." She nodded, but didn't close her eyes. "Michael, what if we can't find our way back tomorrow?" "We will," I assured her with more confidence than I felt. "The storm will pass, and we'll use the sun to navigate. Basic survival skills, remember?" Eventually, exhaustion overcame her anxiety, and Olivia drifted off to sleep. I sat awake, feeding small pieces of wood into the fire, listening to the storm. It showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying, the cabin creaking and groaning under the assault of wind and rain. I must have dozed off despite my best intentions, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by Olivia shaking my shoulder. "Michael!" she hissed, her eyes wide with fear. "There's someone outside." I blinked, disoriented. The fire had died down to embers, casting the cabin in deep shadow. The storm still raged, but through it, I could hear what had alarmed Olivia. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. "Maybe it's another hiker," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. The footsteps circled the cabin, pausing at each window. Then, faintly but unmistakably, came the humming, the same melodic tune we'd heard at our campsite. Olivia clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "It's her," she breathed, "the whispering widow." I wanted to dismiss her fear as superstition, but something about that humming raised the hair on the back of my neck. It was too perfect, too measured, like a practiced lure. The footsteps returned to the front door. We watched in frozen silence as the handle turned slowly. The door, which I was certain I had latched, swung open. Rain and wind gusted into the cabin, but the doorway remained empty. No one entered. Instead, the humming grew louder, now seeming to come from inside the cabin itself, from the dark corner where the bed frame stood. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on with shaking hands. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the corner, and there, sitting on the edge of the bed frame, was a woman. She was thin to the point of emaciation, with long, matted gray hair that hung in wet strands around a pale, gaunt face. Her clothes, what looked like a tattered dress from another century, were soaked through and muddy. But it was her eyes that froze my blood. Completely black, with no whites at all, like pools of ink that reflected the flashlight beam in pinpricks of light. "Hello, travelers," she said, her voice both young and ancient at once, harmonizing with itself as if multiple people were speaking through one mouth. "Are you lost?" Beside me, Olivia made a small strangled sound. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The woman tilted her head, an unnaturally fluid movement. "No need to speak. I can hear your thoughts just fine." She stood, her movements jerky like a marionette controlled by unpracticed hands. "You've come far from the trail. Few find my home by accident." We got caught in the storm," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'll leave at first light." The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. "But I've just prepared beds for you. It's been so long since I've had guests." She gestured toward the bed frame, which now, impossibly, held 2 stained mattresses where minutes before there had been none. "No, thank you," Olivia said, finding her voice at last. "We're comfortable here by the fire." The woman's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "I insist." Something in her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to comply, to walk to the bed and lie down. My legs actually began to move before I caught myself. "We appreciate your hospitality," I said carefully, fighting against the strange compulsion. "But we'll be leaving now." The woman's face contorted, losing any semblance of humanity. "No one leaves," she hissed, the multiple voices in her throat dissonant now. "You're mine now. Your voices will join my collection." She began to hum again, but this time the sound was accompanied by other voices. Dozens of them, men and women, all humming the same eerie melody from different locations around the cabin. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing our backpacks with one hand and Olivia with the other. We bolted for the door, but the woman moved with impossible speed, suddenly blocking our path. "You can't leave," she said, her form seeming to grow larger, elongating in the doorway. "The forest is mine. You entered willingly." Behind her, through the open door, I could see shapes moving in the darkness, human-like figures swaying among the trees, all humming that terrible melody. Olivia screamed, the sound breaking through my terror-induced paralysis. I lunged forward, shoving the woman with all my strength. My hands passed through her as if she were made of mist, but the action seemed to disrupt her concentration. Her form wavered, becoming temporarily transparent. "Now!" I yelled, pulling Olivia through the doorway and into the storm. We ran blindly into the forest, rain lashing our faces, branches whipping at our arms and legs. Behind us, the humming grew in volume and urgency, and I could hear footsteps, dozens of them, crashing through the underbrush in pursuit. "Don't look back," I gasped to Olivia, who was struggling to keep pace beside me. "Just keep running." But the forest seemed to work against us. Roots rose up from the ground to trip us. Branches bent down to block our path, and the terrain became increasingly difficult to navigate. Worse, the humming surrounded us now, coming from all directions at once, as if the entire forest was singing that maddening tune. Olivia stumbled, crying out as her ankle twisted beneath her. I caught her before she fell, supporting her weight as we continued to flee. "I can't," she sobbed, limping heavily. "Michael, I can't run anymore." "We have to," I insisted, practically dragging her now. "They're getting closer." Through gaps in the trees, I could see the figures moving parallel to us, gliding over the forest floor without seeming to touch it. They were hurting us, I realized with horror, driving us in a specific direction rather than closing in for the kill. The trees suddenly thinned, and we found ourselves on the edge of a clearing. At its center was a circle of standing stones, ancient and moss-covered, barely visible through the sheeting rain. The humming reached a crescendo as we stumbled into the clearing, the sound now physically painful vibrating in my bones. In the center of the stone circle stood the woman from the cabin, but she was transformed. She towered over the stones, her hair writhing around her head like serpents, her body elongated to impossible proportions. Behind her, arranged in concentric circles, stood dozens of figures, men and women of all ages, their eyes hollow black pits, their mouths open in that endless, harmonizing hum. "You see now," the woman said, her voice booming over the storm. "You see my children, once lost like you, now found, now mine." The figures began to step forward, moving in perfect unison, their arms outstretched toward us. In the flashes of lightning, I could see their faces clearly, all bearing the same expression of empty rapture, all humming that hypnotic melody. "The stones!" Olivia gasped, clutching my arm. "Look at the stones!" I tore my gaze from the approaching figures to the standing stones that encircled us. Each was carved with symbols, the same protection runes we'd seen in the cabin, and at the base of each stone were offerings, small bundles of herbs, coins, scraps of cloth. "Protection," Olivia whispered. "They're protection circles. The locals must still leave offerings." Understanding flashed through my mind. The stones are containing her. She can't leave this clearing. That's why she needs to lure people in. The woman shrieked, a sound like tearing metal that cut through the humming. "Clever little flies," she spat. "But you're already in my web." Her form seemed to collapse in on itself, shrinking down to human size again, but now moving with a jerky, spider-like quality as she scuttled toward us. The circle of hollow-eyed figures closed in as well, their movements synchronized, hands reaching. "The offerings," Olivia said urgently. "We need to strengthen the circle." Without fully understanding the logic, I trusted her instinct. We stumbled toward the nearest standing stone, where small trinkets had been placed. Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out her silver pendant, a family heirloom she always carried for luck. "A gift, freely given, strengthens the barrier," she said, placing the pendant among the offerings. "That's what the book said about protection circles." I fumbled in my pockets, finding my grandfather's old compass. It had emotional significance to me, a connection to my past. I placed it beside Olivia's pendant. The effect was immediate and startling. The stone began to glow with a faint blue light, which spread to the adjacent stones, illuminating the runes carved into their surfaces. The woman let out another piercing shriek, recoiling from the spreading light. The humming faltered as the hollow-eyed figures also retreated, their movements becoming disjointed and confused. "More!" I shouted. "T," pulling Olivia toward the next stone. "We need to activate them all." We moved around the circle as quickly as Olivia's injured ankle would allow, leaving personal items at each stone, her favorite hair clip, my watch, even our wedding rings. With each offering, the blue light grew stronger, forming a barrier that rose from the stones like a translucent dome. The woman's form was changing again, twisting in on itself as she raged against the strengthening barrier. Her followers were similarly affected, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways, the humming breaking into discordant screeches. As we placed our final offerings, Olivia's cherished journal and my pocket knife, the blue light flared blindingly bright. The dome closed completely over the stone circle, sealing the woman and her followers inside. Her final scream cut through the night, a sound of such primal rage and frustration that we covered our ears in pain. Then, abruptly, silence fell. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and the wind died away. We stood trembling outside the circle of stones, now a cage of shimmering blue light. Within it, the woman and her followers had frozen in grotesque poses, like insects trapped in amber. What just happened?" I gasped, my voice hoarse. Olivia shook her head, equally stunned. "I don't know. I just remembered what the book said about protection circles and offerings. I didn't think it would actually work." We backed away from the stone circle, unwilling to test the permanence of the barrier. The forest around us felt different now, lighter somehow. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. And, miraculously, as we turned to look for a path out of the clearing, we saw lights through the trees, flashlights, moving in our direction. "Hello," came a gruff voice. "Anyone out there?" "Here," I shouted, waving frantically. "We're here." 3 forest rangers emerged from the tree line, looking surprised to find us. "Well, I'll be damned," said the lead ranger, a weathered man with a salt and pepper beard. "How'd you two end up all the way out here?" "We got lost," I said simply, too exhausted to explain the inexplicable. Our campsite was somewhere near Savage River, but then the storm— The ranger's expression grew serious. "You're nowhere near Savage River, folks. You're in the restricted area of Green Ridge State Forest. It's been closed to the public for years." Olivia and I exchanged confused glances. "That's not possible," she said. "We were at Savage River yesterday morning." The ranger shook his head. "Savage River is nearly 30 miles from here. There's no way you hike that far in a day." As the rangers led us back to their vehicle, I couldn't resist asking, "Why is this area restricted?" The lead ranger was quiet for a moment before answering. "Old stories, local superstition mostly. Something about a witch that collects souls." "Eleanor Blackwood," said the younger ranger, earning a sharp look from his superior. "That's what my grandmother called her. Said she lures hikers off the trails with her singing." "That's enough, Jenkins," the lead ranger said firmly. "These folks don't need to hear that nonsense." But as we looked back one last time, I could see the blue glow of the stone circle fading into the darkness, and I knew the legends were far from nonsense. Over the following weeks, as Olivia and I recovered from our ordeal, we researched everything we could find about Eleanor Blackwood and the history of Green Ridge State Forest. The stories varied, but the core remained the same. A woman accused of witchcraft in the 1830s, driven into the forest by superstitious locals, who swore she promised to return and take their voices as they had taken her good name. The standing stone circle wasn't mentioned in any official records, but we found references to it in local folklore, a containment site created by a desperate community to trap something they couldn't kill. We never got our offerings back, of course, but sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear that faint humming at the edge of consciousness, a reminder that some barriers aren't permanent, and that somewhere in the forests of western Maryland, Eleanor Blackwood is still waiting for travelers to stray from the path into the domain of the Whispering Widow. Now, Olivia and I stick to well-marked trails and popular campgrounds. We tell ourselves it was just a shared delusion, brought on by exhaustion and fear. But we still carry new offerings in our pockets, just in case. Small trinkets we'd be willing to part with to save our voices, our minds, and our souls from joining Eleanor's chorus in the Forest of Whispers. My name is Ryan Nelson, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Savage River State Forest, Maryland, just last summer. The mountains had always been my sanctuary. My escape from the suffocating cubicle where I spent 40 hours a week analyzing data nobody cared about. That's why, when my buddies from IT suggested a 4-day hiking trip through Savage River State Forest, I jumped at the chance. Tyler Mitchell, our self-appointed wilderness expert with his REI subscription and outdoor blog, had mapped our route through the most remote sections of the forest. Marcus Quinn, quiet and thoughtful, had just gone through a brutal divorce and needed the distraction. And then there was Derek Hoffman, the office clown who'd never hiked a day in his life but insisted on coming along with his brand new, unused gear. "It's called forest bathing," Tyler explained as we parked at the New Germany trailhead on a muggy Friday afternoon in July. "Japanese practice it for mental health. 4 days disconnected from technology is exactly what we all need." Marcus nodded silently, his eyes distant as he shouldered his pack. I knew he was thinking about Julie and the custody battle still raging over their 7-year-old daughter. "Forest bathing? So I didn't need to pack soap," Derek quipped, already sweating through his moisture-wicking shirt. I laughed, but something about the forest made me uneasy from the moment we stepped onto the trail. Maybe it was the unusually thick canopy that blocked most of the sunlight, or the strange silence. No birdsong, no rustling in the underbrush, just the sound of our boots on the path and our labored breathing as we climbed. "This forest has some history," Tyler said as we hiked deeper into the woods. "Local legend says there was a logging camp here in the 1920s. Whole crew disappeared one winter. 23 men. Search parties found the camp intact. Food still on plates, beds still made. No tracks in the snow except for one set leading into the woods." He grinned over his shoulder. "They called the man Jacob Sawyer. Some say he still wanders these woods, looking for more victims to add to his collection. Derek laughed nervously. Thanks for the campfire story, man. It's broad daylight, I said, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed to press in on us from all sides, the trees unnaturally close together, their branches reaching toward us like gnarled fingers. We hiked until dusk, making good time despite Derek's frequent rest stops. Our campsite for the night was a small clearing near Big Savage Mountain. Tyler built a fire while Marcus and I set up the tents. Derek collapsed onto a fallen log, his face red with exertion. "I'm dying," he moaned. "Why didn't anyone tell me hiking was just walking, but worse?" "You'll get your trail legs tomorrow," Tyler assured him, feeding branches into the fire. The flames flickered oddly, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently across the ground. I blinked, and they behaved normally again. After dinner, we sat around the fire, passing a flask of whiskey. The alcohol warmed me, but I couldn't relax. The forest was still unnaturally quiet. No owls, no insects, just the crackling of the fire and our voices, which seemed too loud in the stillness. "Did you hear that?" Marcus asked suddenly, his head jerking toward the darkness beyond our campsite. We all froze, listening. For a moment, I heard nothing. Then, a cracking sound, like a heavy footstep on dried wood. Then another, moving away from us. "Probably a deer," Tyler said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. "Right," Derek agreed, a little too quickly. "Just Bambi out for a stroll." "Let's turn in," I suggested. "Long day tomorrow." In my tent that night, I couldn't sleep. The ground beneath my sleeping bag felt wrong somehow. Not hard and rooty as it should have been, but almost soft, yielding beneath my weight like something organic. I told myself it was all in my head, closed my eyes, and eventually drifted into a fitful doze. I dreamed of dark shapes moving through the trees, of a man with hollow eyes and a smile that stretched too wide. He carried an old logging axe crusted with something dark and flaking. "I've been waiting for you, Ryan," he said, and I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding. The tent was bathed in gray pre-dawn light. Marcus was gone, his sleeping bag empty but unzipped from the inside. I sat up, disoriented. Had he just gotten up early? But none of his things were gone. His backpack still leaned against the tent wall. His boots still lined up neatly at the entrance. Unzipping the tent, I stepped out into the clearing. The morning air was thick with fog that clung to my skin like cobwebs. "Marcus," I called, my voice strangely muffled in the mist. Tyler emerged from his tent, hair disheveled. "What's up?" "Marcus is gone. Did you see him?" Tyler frowned. "No, maybe he went to take a leak." I shook my head. Without his boots? We woke Derek, who hadn't heard anything during the night, and began searching the perimeter of our campsite, calling Marcus's name. The fog swallowed our voices, sending them back to us distorted and wrong. "His tracks go this way," Tyler said, pointing to a barely visible path of crushed vegetation leading away from camp and into the dense trees. What was strange was that the footprints were barefoot, the outline of toes clearly visible in the soft earth. "Why would he go off without shoes?" Derek asked, voicing my exact thought. "Maybe he was sleepwalking," I suggested, but the explanation felt hollow. Marcus had never mentioned sleepwalking before. "We should follow the tracks," Tyler said, already shouldering his day pack. "He can't have gone far." We left our campsite intact, taking only water and a few energy bars. Derek looked like he wanted to stay behind, but a glance at the now oppressive silence of the clearing changed his mind. The tracks led us deeper into the forest, away from the established trail. The fog grew thicker as we walked, wrapping around the trees like hungry ghosts. The ground beneath our feet began to change, the soil turning darker, almost black and damper, sucking at our boots with each step. "This isn't right," Derek whispered after we'd been walking for nearly an hour. "We should have found him by now." I checked my phone out of habit, even though I knew there was no signal this deep in the woods. The screen was blank, the battery completely drained despite having been at 80% the night before. "Tyler, check your GPS," I said. Tyler pulled out his handheld GPS unit and frowned. "It's not working. Says we're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Let's head back to camp. Maybe Marcus returned while we were out looking." "Which way is back?" Derek asked. His voice rising slightly. I turned around expecting to see our footprints marking the way we'd come, but the ground behind us was undisturbed, as if we'd materialized right where we stood. "This is insane," Derek muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We just walked in a straight line." "Everyone stay calm," Tyler said, though I could hear the edge of panic in his voice. "The sun is that way, so camp should be east of here." We started walking east, or what Tyler claimed was east, though the thick canopy and fog made it impossible to see the sun's position. I felt increasingly disoriented, the trees all looking identical, the ground continuing to darken and soften beneath our feet. The silence was complete now. Not even the sound of our breathing seemed to carry in the thick air. After another hour of walking, we stumbled into a clearing and stopped short. In the center stood the weathered remains of what might once have been a cabin. The roof had collapsed inward, and the walls were rotted and sagging, but it was unmistakably human-made. Around the perimeter of the clearing, tall wooden posts had been driven into the ground. Each post was topped with a bundle of sticks tied together in complex patterns. "What the hell is this place?" I whispered, a sense of dread washing over me. "It's not on any map I studied," Tyler said, his earlier confidence completely gone. Derek took a step back. "We need to leave, now." I agreed with him, but something caught my eye, a flash of color against the gray-brown decay of the cabin. Moving closer, ignoring Tyler's warning hiss, I saw what it was. Marcus's red bandana, the one he'd been wearing around his neck yesterday, now hanging from a rusted nail on the cabin's door. "He's been here," I said, reaching for the bandana. As my fingers touched the fabric, the air around us changed, the temperature dropping dramatically in seconds, my breath suddenly visible in front of my face. A low, humming sound began to build, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Ryan, don't," Tyler began, but it was too late. I'd already pulled the bandana free. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by complete silence more absolute than anything I'd ever experienced. It was as if someone had switched off the world. Then, from inside the cabin came a sound, a slow, deliberate footstep. Then another. Something was moving toward the door. "Run!" Derek screamed, the sound jarring after the silence. We turned and sprinted back into the trees, no longer caring which direction we went as long as it was away from that clearing. We ran until our lungs burned, stumbling over roots and crashing through underbrush. Finally, gasping for breath, we stopped in another small clearing. This one was empty save for a circle of stones that might once have been a fire pit. "What the fuck was that?" Derek panted, bent double with his hands on his knees. "I don't know," Tyler admitted, his face pale beneath his tan. "But we need to find our way back to a trail, back to civilization." "What about Marcus?" I asked, suddenly remembering the bandana clutched in my fist. I opened my hand to look at it and froze. It wasn't a bandana at all, but a strip of something dark and leathery, dotted with what looked horribly like hair follicles. I dropped it with a cry of disgust, wiping my hand frantically against my pants. "We need to find Marcus now," I said, my voice shaking. Tyler nodded grimly. "Let's keep moving. If we can get to higher ground, maybe we can spot a landmark, get our bearings." We set off again, this time trying to head uphill. The forest seemed to fight us at every step, branches catching on our clothes, roots rising to trip our feet, the ground becoming increasingly boggy despite the fact that we were climbing. The light began to fade, though my watch, which had stopped at 3:17 a.m., couldn't tell me if it was approaching evening or if the forest was simply growing darker around us. "Look," Derek said suddenly, pointing ahead. Through the trees, I could make out another clearing. This one contained 3 large boulders arranged in a rough triangle. In the center of the triangle was a dark opening in the ground, a cave or a sinkhole. "We should avoid that," Tyler said, veering to skirt the clearing. But as we changed course, I caught movement from the corner of my eye, a figure stepping out from behind one of the boulders. My heart leapt. "Marcus!" I called out, relief flooding through me. The figure turned slowly toward the sound of my voice. It was Marcus, but something was wrong. He stood unnaturally still, his posture rigid. Even from this distance, I could see that his eyes were wide open, unblinking. "Marcus," I called again, more hesitantly this time. "You okay, man?" He smiled then, a slow, creeping smile that stretched too wide across his face. His teeth seemed sharper somehow and too numerous. "Ooh. I found him, Ryan," Marcus said, his voice oddly flat. "I found Jacob Sawyer. He's been waiting for all of you." A cold sweat broke out across my body. This wasn't Marcus. Not anymore. Whatever was wearing my friend's skin was something else entirely. "We need to go," Tyler whispered urgently. "Now." But before we could move, Marcus, or the thing that had been Marcus, let out an inhuman howl that echoed through the forest. The sound was answered by other howls, distant but coming closer, surrounding us from all sides. "Run!" Tyler shouted, and we did, crashing through the underbrush with panic-fueled speed. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Marcus was following, but not running. He was walking with that same unnatural stillness, yet somehow keeping pace with us. And he wasn't alone. Shadowy figures moved through the trees on either side, paralleling our course, herding us. We burst through a line of trees and skidded to a halt. Before us stretched a vast clearing, at least 100 yards across, and in that clearing stood rows upon rows of wooden posts, each topped with bundles of sticks, just like the ones we'd seen at the cabin, but hundreds of them, stretching as far as I could see in the fading light. "Oh God," Derek whispered, his voice breaking. "Oh God, oh God." In the center of the clearing was a massive stump, at least 10 feet across, the remains of an ancient, massive tree. Arranged in a circle around it were smaller stumps, like seats, and on one of those seats sat a figure. Even from this distance, I could tell it wasn't human, not entirely. It was shaped like a man, but too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at odd angles. It wore the tattered remains of what might once have been logging clothes, now stained dark with what I desperately hoped wasn't blood. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze fixed on us. Slowly, deliberately, it raised one impossibly long arm and beckoned to us. "We can't go out there," Tyler said, his voice barely audible. "We need to find another way around." But when we turned, Marcus stood directly behind us, still wearing that terrible smile. Beyond him, I could see other figures emerging from the trees, men and women in hiking clothes, their movements stiff and wrong, their eyes vacant, their smiles identical to Marcus's. Some of them looked fresh, normal except for their expressions. Others were clearly dead, their skin gray and bloated or dried and leathery, depending on how long they'd been in these woods. "You can't leave," Marcus said flatly. "Jacob has been so lonely. He needs new friends, new bodies." One of the figures stepped forward, a woman in her 40s, wearing a park ranger uniform that was rotted and falling apart. Half of her face was gone, revealing bone and the writhing, maggoty mass beneath. "The forest provides," she intoned, her voice a dry rustle. "The forest takes." They began to close in around us, forcing us toward the clearing with its countless wooden totems. Up close, I could see that what I'd thought were bundles of sticks were actually complex lattices made of bone, human finger bones, precisely arranged and bound with what looked like dried sinew. "Tyler," I hissed desperately, "what do we do?" For once, our self-appointed expert had no answer. His face was blank with terror as the walking corpses herded us into the clearing, toward the massive figure seated on the central stump. As we drew closer, I could finally see its face. What had once been human was now stretched and distorted, the skin pulled tight over an elongated skull. Its eyes were sunken black pits, and its mouth was a jagged gash that split its face nearly in half. When it smiled, I could see rows of sharpened teeth, like a shark's. "Welcome," it said, its voice a low, grating sound that seemed to come from all around us rather than from its mouth. "I am Jacob Sawyer. I've been waiting for you." "Please," Derek sobbed, falling to his knees. "Please let us go. We won't tell anyone. We'll just leave." Jacob tilted his head at an impossible angle, studying Derek with those empty eye sockets. "No one leaves my forest," he said simply. "Not really. Part of you stays forever. The best part." He stood then, unfolding to his full height, nearly 8 feet tall, his limbs too long and jointed in too many places. In one hand, he held an ancient logging axe, its blade dark with old, crusted blood. With his other hand, he reached out and grabbed Derek by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. Derek kicked and struggled, his face turning purple as Jacob's impossibly long fingers tightened around his neck. "You first," Jacob said, his face splitting into that terrible grin again. "Your fear is so fresh, so pure." I don't know what came over me in that moment, whether it was courage or madness or simply the animal instinct to survive, but I launched myself at Jacob, driving my shoulder into his midsection. It was like hitting a tree, solid and unyielding, but the surprise of the attack made him drop Derek, who collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Jacob's empty gaze turned to me, and I felt a cold dread unlike anything I'd ever experienced. "You're different," he said, something like curiosity in his inhuman voice. "Strong-willed. You'll make an excellent addition to my collection." "Run!" I shouted to Tyler, who stood frozen nearby. "Get Derek and run." Tyler snapped out of his paralysis, grabbing Derek's arm and hauling him to his feet. They staggered away, back toward the tree line, while I faced Jacob, knowing I was about to die but determined to give my friends a chance to escape. Jacob swung his axe in a lazy arc, the blade whistling through the air. I barely managed to dodge, the edge passing so close to my face that I felt the wind of its passage. He was toying with me, I realized, a cat playing with a mouse before the kill. From the corner of my eye, I saw Tyler and Derek reach the edge of the clearing. Good. Maybe they'd make it. Maybe someone would survive to tell our story, to warn others away from this place. Jacob's next swing caught me by surprise, the flat of the blade striking my shoulder with bone-crushing force. I heard something crack and felt a white-hot burst of pain as I fell to the ground. Looking up, I saw Jacob looming over me, axe raised for the killing blow. But before he could bring it down, an unearthly howl tore through the clearing, different from the ones we'd heard before, filled with rage rather than hunger. Jacob's head snapped up, his attention diverted. From the tree line burst something massive and furry, moving so fast it was just a blur. It slammed into Jacob with incredible force, sending them both rolling across the ground in a tangle of limbs. I scrambled backward, clutching my shattered shoulder, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a wolf, or at least it had the basic shape of a wolf, but it was the size of a small horse, its fur matted and filthy. And its eyes. Its eyes glowed with an amber light that seemed to burn from within. "Run, human," a voice growled in my head, though the wolf's mouth didn't move. "Run while he is distracted." I didn't need to be told twice. Struggling to my feet, I staggered toward where Tyler and Derek had disappeared. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of combat, snarls and roars and the splintering of wood. The forest was in chaos, the walking corpses that had surrounded us now milling about in confusion without Jacob's direct control. I plunged into the trees, moving as fast as my injured body would allow, following what I hoped were Tyler and Derek's tracks. Pain lanced through my shoulder with every step, but fear drove me onward, deeper into the forest, away from that hellish clearing. I don't know how long I ran, or how far, how time seemed meaningless in that place. Eventually, I collapsed against a tree trunk, my vision swimming from pain and exhaustion. The forest around me was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the oppressive wrongness from before, but the natural quiet of a woodland at night. "Ryan!" The voice reached me as if from a great distance. "Ryan, where are you?" Tyler. He was looking for me. "Here," I tried to call, but it came out as little more than a croak. I fumbled in my pocket for my emergency whistle and blew it with what little strength I had left. Minutes later, Tyler and Derek crashed through the underbrush, their faces lighting up with relief when they saw me. "Jesus, we thought you were dead," Tyler said, kneeling beside me to examine my shoulder. "Almost was," I managed. "Something saved me. A wolf, but not a wolf. It attacked Jacob." Tyler and Derek exchanged glances. "We need to get you out of here," Tyler said, carefully helping me to my feet. "We found a trail marker about half a mile back. I think we're near the edge of the state forest." "What about Marcus?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Derek shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "That wasn't Marcus anymore. Whatever's left of him is still back there." We made our way slowly through the forest, following the trail markers Tyler had found. With each step, the woods seemed more normal, the air lighter, the sounds more natural. Eventually, we reached a park access road where, miraculously, a park ranger was just finishing her patrol. Her name was Ranger Monica Diaz, and at first she didn't believe our wild tale of walking corpses and an immortal logger. But the look in our eyes, and my very real injury, convinced her to at least get us to a hospital. At the Frostburg Regional Medical Center, doctors treated my shattered collarbone and the various cuts and bruises all three of us had accumulated. The police came to take our statements, their faces skeptical as we recounted our experience. They dismissed our story as hallucinations brought on by some toxic mushroom we must have accidentally ingested while hiking. They found Marcus's car still parked at the New Germany trailhead, but no sign of Marcus himself. The official report listed him as missing, possibly injured in the wilderness. Search parties combed the area for weeks but found nothing. Not Marcus, not the cabin, not the clearing with its hundreds of bone totems, and certainly not Jacob Sawyer. Tyler, Derek, and I tried to return to normal life. But how do you go back to analyzing data and fixing IT problems after something like that? We don't speak much anymore. Too many memories, too much shared trauma. Derek moved to Arizona, about as far from forests as he could get. Tyler quit his job and now works as a lighthouse keeper on the Maine coast, where he can see danger coming from miles away. As for me, I still live in Maryland, but I've moved to Baltimore, surrounded by concrete and steel. I don't hike anymore. I don't even like to walk through the city parks. At night, I dream of that clearing with its bone totems, of Marcus's inhuman smile, of Jacob Sawyer's axe coming down. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I can hear a wolf howling. A warning, perhaps, or a reminder. The ranger who rescued us, Monica Diaz, told me later that there are no wolves in Maryland, haven't been for 100 years. But I know what I saw, what I heard. Something saved me that day. Something as ancient and powerful as Jacob Sawyer, but not evil, not quite. I've researched local legends since then, trying to make sense of what happened. I found references to an Algonquian spirit called the Wendigo, a malevolent entity created by greed and cannibalism. That sounds like Jacob. And I found mentions of another spirit, a protector, a guardian of the forest that takes the form of a massive wolf. The Algonquians called it Chanu. These days I keep a small wooden carving of a wolf on my bedside table. A charm, a totem of my own, a thank you to whatever saved me in those woods. And a reminder that if I ever feel the urge to return to Savage River State Forest, to find Marcus or confront Jacob Sawyer again, I should ignore it. Because I know the truth now. Some parts of this world don't belong to us anymore. Maybe they never did. And the things that dwell in those dark places have been waiting for a very long time, Whatever is waiting in the forest will still be there long after I'm gone, and if you're smart, you'll stay far, far away from Savage River State Forest, because once the forest takes you, it never really lets you go. My name is William Brown, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Maryland's Savage River State Forest last autumn, when the leaves were turning and the air carried that first bite of winter. I'd been planning this solo camping trip for months, a week of isolation to clear my head after the divorce. Karen had taken everything: the house, half my savings, and worst of all, custody of our daughter Emma. The court-mandated therapy wasn't helping, and my therapist suggested I reconnect with myself through nature. "Find your center again," she'd said, as if my center wasn't torn out when Emma's weekend visits were reduced to twice a month. I chose Western Maryland because it was remote enough to feel disconnected from Baltimore's constant noise, but still within a reasonable drive. The Savage River State Forest offered miles of untouched wilderness with scattered trails that saw few hikers, especially in late October when most sensible people preferred their horror movies from the comfort of their couches rather than tempting the real thing in the backcountry. The drive to the trailhead took nearly 4 hours from my cramped one-bedroom apartment. My phone's navigation kept cutting out as I wound through increasingly narrow forest roads, the trees pressing closer on either side. By the time I reached the small gravel parking area marking the start of the hollow trail, only one other vehicle sat there: a battered green pickup truck with Pennsylvania plates and a gun rack in the back window. I parked my Subaru, double-checked my pack, and secured my hunting knife to my belt. I wasn't planning to hunt, but growing up in rural Pennsylvania had taught me never to enter the woods unarmed. The air felt unusually still as I locked my car and hoisted my backpack. A weathered sign marked the trailhead: Hollow Trail, 8.4 miles. Primitive camping permitted. The trail started gently enough, winding through a dense stand of oak and maple trees ablaze with autumn colors. I walked steadily, the familiar weight of my pack settling comfortably across my shoulders. The solitude felt good. No emails, no lawyer calls, no sympathetic glances from coworkers. Just the rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath my boots and the occasional call of a distant bird. 3 hours in, the trail began to change. The vibrant fall colors gave way to trees that seemed sickly. Their leaves blackened at the edges as if touched by frost, despite the day being unusually warm for late October. The path narrowed and descended into a ravine, where the sunlight struggled to penetrate the canopy. The locals called this section the Hollow, a long, deep depression in the earth where the temperature dropped noticeably and sound behaved strangely, either deadened completely or amplified depending on where you stood. I checked my GPS to mark my location, but the screen showed only static. My phone had no service, which wasn't surprising this deep in the forest. I pulled out my topographical map instead, orienting myself by the position of the sun, which was beginning its westward descent. According to the map, a small clearing suitable for camping lay about 2 miles ahead, beside a tributary of the Savage River. That's when I first heard it, a sound so subtle I initially mistook it for the wind, a soft, rhythmic crying that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stopped, straining to listen. The forest had gone completely silent, no birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves, just that distant, mournful weeping that raised the hair on my arms. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding flat in the dense air. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped abruptly. I stood frozen, waiting. After nearly a minute of nothing but my own pulse thudding in my ears, I convinced myself it had been the wind after all, or perhaps some animal I couldn't identify. I pressed on, but my pace quickened and I found myself checking over my shoulder every few minutes. The clearing appeared just before sunset, a perfect oval of grass beside a narrow stream that gurgled pleasantly over smooth stones. I began setting up camp with practiced efficiency, wanting to have everything secure before darkness fell completely. As I hammered the last tent stake into the surprisingly soft earth, I noticed something across the stream, a structure of some kind, barely visible through the trees. Curiosity got the better of me. I crossed the shallow water, my boots keeping my feet dry, and approached what appeared to be the remains of an old cabin. The roof had long since collapsed, and nature had reclaimed most of the walls, but the stone foundation remained intact, creating a perfect square in the forest floor. In the center of this square, incongruously, sat a child's rocking chair, weathered gray but otherwise intact. Something about the scene felt deeply wrong. The chair was positioned as if someone had been sitting there watching my campsite. I backed away, an involuntary shudder running through me, and returned to my camp. Night fell quickly in the hollow. I built a fire, its cheerful crackling a welcome companion as I heated my freeze-dried beef stew. The flames cast dancing shadows among the trees, creating shapes that seemed to move with purpose just beyond the circle of light. I told myself this was normal, just my mind playing tricks after a day of physical exertion and solitude. I was cleaning my cooking pot in the stream when I heard it again, that same soft crying, closer now. It came from the direction of the ruined cabin. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay by the fire, I grabbed my flashlight and knife and moved toward the sound. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the stone foundation. The rocking chair was moving, back and forth, in a gentle rhythm that matched the cadence of the crying. But there was no one sitting in it. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking slightly. The rocking slowed, then stopped. The crying ceased. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw something on the seat of the chair that hadn't been there before. A small, crudely made doll fashioned from twigs and bound with what looked like human hair. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was someone's idea of a sick joke. Maybe locals who didn't appreciate outsiders camping in their forest. Maybe the owner of that green pickup truck. I returned to my campfire and added more wood, building it higher than necessary. Sleep felt impossible now, but I crawled into my tent anyway, zipping the door shut and placing my knife within easy reach. Outside, the wind picked up, sending waves of whispers through the trees. I plugged in my earbuds and played music from my phone until the battery warning flashed, trying to drown out both the forest and my thoughts. I must have drifted off eventually, because I awoke to absolute darkness. My phone was dead, and the fire had burned out completely. The air inside the tent felt heavy, compressed, as if something was pressing down from above. And there was a smell, earthy and rotten, like disturbed grave soil mixed with something metallic. Something was moving outside my tent. Not the random stirrings of forest animals, but deliberate movement. Slow, dragging footsteps circling the perimeter. Around and around they went, stopping occasionally before continuing their circuit. I lay frozen, barely breathing, my fingers wrapped around the handle of my knife. The footsteps completed one full circle, then another. On the third pass, they stopped directly outside my tent door. The fabric of the tent bulged inward as if something, was pressing against it. I could make out the impression of a small hand, about the size of a child's, pushing into the nylon. "Daddy?" a voice whispered, a little girl's voice. It sounded exactly like Emma. My blood turned to ice. "Emma," I answered automatically, even as my rational mind screamed that this was impossible. My daughter was 300 miles away with her mother. "I'm cold, Daddy," the voice continued, its pitch slightly wrong now, wavering between a child's high tones and something deeper. "Let me in." The hand pressed harder against the tent, the 5 small fingers spreading wide, then curling into a claw-like grasp. "You're not Emma," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The thing outside went still. For several long seconds, there was no movement, no sound. Then, without warning, a terrible shriek erupted. Not a human sound at all, but something ancient and full of rage. The hand withdrew, and I heard those dragging footsteps moving rapidly away from the tent, toward the ruined cabin. I wasn't about to wait for it to return. I grabbed my headlamp, knife, and the small emergency pack I always kept ready. The rest could stay. Nothing was worth spending another minute in that clearing. Outside the tent, my beam of light revealed fresh disturbances in the dirt. Long, uneven furrows as if something had been dragged in circles around my tent. They led away toward the cabin, just as I'd heard. The fire pit contained nothing but cold ashes, though I was certain there should have been hot coals at least. I oriented myself using the North Star and headed back toward the trail, moving as quickly and quietly as I could through the darkness. The forest felt alive around me in a way that had nothing to do with its natural inhabitants. Whispers followed me, sometimes falling behind, sometimes racing ahead to wait on the path. Twice I saw movement at the edge of my light, a small darting shape that seemed to be pacing me. The trail began to look unfamiliar. According to my map, it should have been leading upward, out of the hollow, but instead it seemed to be taking me deeper. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out the stars. Several times I found myself at dead ends or circular clearings with no obvious exit, forcing me to backtrack. I was lost. The realization hit me with cold certainty. Somehow, though I'd been following what appeared to be a clear trail, I was no longer on the hollow trail at all. Dawn found me sitting on a fallen log, exhausted and disoriented. In the gray morning light, the forest looked almost normal. Though the trees here were strangely twisted, their bark blackened in places as if by some ancient fire. I consulted my map again, trying to determine where I'd gone wrong, when a sound made me look up. A man stood watching me from between two massive oaks. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in faded flannel and canvas pants that had seen better days. A scraggly gray beard covered the lower half of his face, but what caught my attention were his eyes, pale blue and unsettlingly bright against his weathered skin. "You're off the trail," he said, his voice rough with disuse. I stood slowly, keeping my hand near my knife. "I got turned around in the dark. Do you know the way back to the hollow trail?" He studied me for a long moment before answering. "Ain't no getting back to it from here, not directly." "What do you mean?" "I came from that direction." I pointed back the way I thought I'd come. The man shook his head. "The hollow doesn't work that way, especially not after you disturbed her." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "Disturbed who?" "Rebecca Thorne," he said, as if the name should mean something to me. "Most folks call her the Hollow Hag now, though not where she might hear." I thought of the rocking chair, the doll, the childlike hand against my tent. There was something at my camp last night. It pretended to be my daughter. The man nodded gravely. "She takes different shapes. Sometimes a lost child, sometimes a wounded animal. Whatever might draw you in." He paused, then added, "My name's Elijah Tanner. I've lived in these woods going on 30 years now. Off the grid, as they say." "William Brown," I replied automatically. "Do you know how I can get back to the trailhead? My car is there." Elijah spat on the ground. "I can show you a way. Won't be the way you came, and it won't be easy, but it'll get you there." He hesitated, then asked, "Did you take anything from the cabin? Something that wasn't yours?" "No," I said truthfully. "I saw a doll, but I didn't touch it." He seemed relieved. "Good. That makes things simpler." He gestured for me to follow him. "Stay close. The paths shift, especially when she's stirred up." I had little choice but to trust him. We set off through the trees, following no path that I could discern. Yet Elijah moved with confidence, occasionally marking trees with his knife in a pattern I didn't recognize. As we walked, he told me the story of Rebecca Thorne. In the early 1900s, she had lived in that cabin with her husband, a logger working for one of the big timber companies stripping the Maryland forests. He was cruel, prone to violent rages fueled by moonshine. One winter night, in a drunken fury, he beat Rebecca and their 6-year-old daughter, then locked them out of the cabin in a blizzard. "They found his body come spring," Elijah said, "inside the cabin, torn apart like something wild had gotten to him. But the door was still barred from the inside, windows intact. The mother and child they never found. Not all of them, anyway. Just the girl's shoes by the stream, filled with ashes. "And people believe this woman's ghost is still here?" I asked, trying to keep the skepticism from my voice. Elijah gave me a sharp look. "Believe what you want. But something's in these woods. Something that doesn't rest and doesn't forget." He pointed to a distant ridge. "The locals know. That's why this part of the forest sees so few hikers despite being public land. The rangers don't even patrol this section if they can help it." We walked for hours, the terrain growing increasingly difficult. Twice we had to cross streams that didn't appear on my map. The second time, I noticed something disturbing: small footprints in the mud of the bank, too fresh to have been made more than an hour before. They appeared to be following us. I pointed them out to Elijah, who frowned deeply. "She's tracking us. We need to move faster." By mid-afternoon, we reached a steep, rocky slope that Elijah claimed would lead us to a fire road connecting to the main forest entrance. As we began to climb, the air grew noticeably colder, though the October sun shone brightly overhead. "Something's wrong," Elijah muttered, pausing to look back the way we'd come. "She's never been this persistent before." I followed his gaze and felt my heart skip a beat. At the bottom of the slope stood a small figure, a little girl in a dirty white dress, her long dark hair obscuring her face. She stood unnaturally still, arms hanging limp at her sides. "Don't look at her," Elijah hissed, "and whatever you do, don't speak to her. Keep climbing." We scrambled upward with new urgency, loose rocks cascading down behind us. When I dared to glance back again, the girl was halfway up the slope, though I hadn't seen her move. Her head was tilted at an impossible angle, and what I could see of her face beneath the tangled hair was wrong. The proportions distorted, the eyes too large and too dark. Elijah muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. We reached the top of the ridge and found ourselves on a narrow dirt road, rutted by tire tracks. Without hesitation, Elijah turned left and began walking rapidly. I followed, fighting the urge to run. "The main road is about 2 miles this way," he said, breathing heavily. "Your trailhead parking will be just beyond the ranger station." The relative openness of the road should have been comforting after the dense forest. But instead, I felt exposed, vulnerable. The sun was beginning its downward arc, and long shadows stretched across our path. I resisted looking back until a strange sound made me turn. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like small stones being struck together. The girl stood in the middle of the road 20 yards behind us. She was knocking 2 rocks together, creating that steady clicking sound. As I watched, frozen, she raised her head fully for the first time, hair falling away from her face. What I saw wasn't the face of a child at all, but something ancient and withered, the skin stretched tight over protruding bones, the mouth a black hole that opened wider than any human mouth should be able to. From that impossible opening came Emma's voice again. "Daddy, why did you leave me?" I felt a hand grab my arm, Elijah pulling me forward. "Run!" he shouted. "Don't listen." We ran. Behind us, the clicking stopped, replaced by the sound of bare feet slapping against dirt, moving much faster than they should have been able to. The road curved ahead, and as we rounded the bend, I saw the blessed sight of a small ranger station, a metal gate, and beyond that, the main forest road. Elijah staggered, clutching his side. He was older than I'd realized, maybe in his 60s, and the run had taken its toll. "Go," he gasped. "Get to your car, drive away from here, and don't come back." "What about you?" I asked, unwilling to leave the man who had guided me to safety. He shook his head. "I'll be fine. She knows me. It's you she's fixed on now." He straightened up with visible effort. "Go, now!" I ran toward the gate, hearing those unnatural footsteps drawing closer behind me. The ranger station appeared unmanned, its windows dark, but the gate stood open. I passed through it onto the paved road beyond and spotted the small parking area where I'd left my car just a quarter-mile ahead. Relief surged through me as I saw my Subaru still sitting there, apparently untouched. The green pickup truck was gone. I glanced back once more and saw Elijah standing at the gate, watching me. Of the girl, there was no sign. I reached my car, hands trembling as I fumbled for my keys. The interior smelled musty, as if it had been closed up for much longer than a day. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking area, tires squealing slightly as I accelerated perhaps faster than necessary. In my rearview mirror, I saw a small figure step out onto the road behind me. Not the withered creature that had chased us, but a little girl who looked heartbreakingly like Emma, one hand raised as if in farewell. Then the road curved, and the image was gone. The drive home was a blur. My phone came back to life once I reached areas with service, revealing dozens of missed calls and texts from my lawyer, my therapist, and Karen. I ignored them all until I was safely back in my apartment with the door locked behind me. Only then did I call Karen, needing desperately to hear that Emma was safe. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice tight with anger and something else. Fear. "Where have you been? I've been calling for days." Days? I checked the date on my phone and felt the room tilt around me. I'd been in those woods not for one night, but for 4 days. "Is Emma okay?" I asked, my voice cracking. A pause, then. "Of course she is. Why wouldn't she be?" "I need to talk to her. Please, Karen." Perhaps something in my voice convinced her. A moment later, Emma's sweet voice came on the line. "Daddy, are you coming to see me this weekend?" Relief made me dizzy. "Yes, sweetheart. Nothing could keep me away." After hanging up, I stripped off my filthy clothes and stood under the shower until the hot water ran out, trying to wash away the lingering smell of the forest that seemed embedded in my skin. Only then did I notice the strange marks on my forearm. 5 small bruises, perfectly spaced like fingerprints, exactly where Elijah had grabbed me to pull me away from the creature. Except they weren't the size of a man's fingers. They were the size of a child's. I've researched extensively since then, trying to make sense of what happened in Savage River State Forest. The historical records confirm that a Rebecca Thorne and her daughter did indeed live in that area in the early 1900s, and that her husband was found dead under mysterious circumstances after a severe winter storm. The official record lists Rebecca and her daughter as presumed dead, bodies not recovered. I found something else too, a local news article from 1987 about the disappearance of a hiker in the same area. The search party found his campsite undisturbed, his tent still zipped from the inside, but the man himself had vanished without a trace. The only clue was a child's rocking chair found nearby, with a crude doll made of twigs sitting on it. The hiker's name was Elijah Tanner. I've never returned to the Hollow Trail, but sometimes on the nights when Emma stays with me, I wake to the sound of soft crying just outside my apartment door. And sometimes in the morning, I find small, muddy footprints on the welcome mat, as if someone had been standing there for hours, waiting to be invited in. I keep the door locked now, and I never, ever answer when I hear a child's voice calling my name after dark. My name is William Brown, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of Green Ridge State Forest, Maryland, just last summer. I've always been what you might call a city person. My life in Baltimore was comfortable. A decent job as a software developer, a small but cozy apartment, and enough social connections to keep loneliness at bay. But something inside me had been growing restless, a vague dissatisfaction that I couldn't quite place. When my therapist suggested I might benefit from a complete change of scenery, something to challenge your comfort zone, William, I surprised myself by immediately thinking of camping. I'd never been camping before. Not real camping, anyway. My parents weren't the outdoorsy type, and as an adult I'd never felt the call of the wild. But suddenly, the idea of being completely removed from my daily routine, from technology, from the constant noise of the city seemed exactly right. I spent weeks researching, buying equipment, watching survival videos online, and planning my route. I settled on Green Ridge State Forest, Maryland's largest state forest, spanning over 47,000 acres of rugged terrain. Remote enough to get the authentic experience, but established enough that a novice like me wouldn't immediately perish. At least, that's what I thought. The drive from Baltimore took about 2.5 hours. As I turned onto the increasingly narrow roads leading into the forest, my phone signal began to fade in and out. The GPS glitched occasionally, but I had printed directions as a backup. The forest welcomed me with a canopy of dense foliage that filtered the late afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns on my windshield. I parked at the Long Pond trailhead and hoisted my overpacked backpack onto my shoulders, its weight immediately making me question my life choices. But the crisp mountain air, the symphony of birdsong, and the promising solitude of the trail beckoned me forward. The first few hours of hiking were exhausting, but exhilarating. The trail wound through thick stands of oak, hickory, and pine, occasionally offering breathtaking views of the Potomac River Valley below. I followed the path toward a backcountry camping area near Stafford Pond, taking frequent breaks to catch my breath and drink water. By the time I reached my intended camping spot, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains. I hurriedly set up my tent on a small clearing about 50 yards from the pond, proud of myself for remembering the steps from all those YouTube tutorials. I gathered wood for a fire, again feeling an absurd sense of accomplishment when the flames finally caught and held. As darkness fell, I sat beside my modest campfire, eating a packet of rehydrated pasta that tasted better than any 5-star restaurant meal simply because I was so hungry. The forest around me had transformed with the night, the friendly chirping of daytime birds replaced by the hooting of owls and the occasional rustling in the underbrush that I tried not to overthink. I was about to retire to my tent when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the natural symphony of the forest. It was singing, a woman's voice, distant but clear, carrying a melody I couldn't quite place. It was beautiful but discordant, the notes slightly off in a way that sent a chill up my spine despite the warmth of the fire. "Hello," I called out, surprised by how small my voice sounded in the vastness of the dark forest. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped immediately. I strained to hear anything, footsteps, voices, any indication of other campers, but the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. Even the insects seemed to be holding their breath. I told myself it was probably just another hiker. Green Ridge wasn't exactly crowded, but it wasn't uncommon to encounter other outdoor enthusiasts. Still, something about the abrupt silence unsettled me. I added more wood to the fire, suddenly very conscious of how it was my only source of light in the enveloping darkness. I must have dozed off beside the fire because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake, disoriented and cold. The fire had burned down to embers, and the forest was bathed in the silvery light of a full moon that had risen while I slept. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m. That's when I noticed it. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the faint glow of the dying fire, stood a figure. It was difficult to make out details in the moonlight, but it appeared to be a woman in a pale dress, her long hair moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Hello?" I called again, my voice cracking. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, watching. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. When I finally managed to switch it on and point it toward the edge of the clearing, there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. I told myself I was seeing things, that my city-dweller imagination was working overtime in this unfamiliar environment. I retreated to my tent, zipping myself securely inside as if the thin nylon could protect me from whatever was out there, or from my own mind playing tricks on me. Sleep evaded me for hours as I lay listening to every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with a pale woman singing a mournful song I couldn't understand, always just out of reach, always watching me with eyes I somehow knew were empty sockets. I woke with the dawn, groggy and unsettled. The bright morning sunlight streaming through the tent fabric did much to dispel the eeriness of the night before. I emerged from my tent, stretching my stiff muscles and trying to shake off the lingering unease. The clearing looked perfectly normal in the daylight, no sign of mysterious visitors. I rebuilt my fire and boiled water for instant coffee, telling myself that lack of sleep and an overactive imagination had conjured up the singing woman. After breakfast, I decided to explore the area around Stafford Pond. The water was still and clear, reflecting the blue sky and surrounding trees like a perfect mirror. I followed a barely visible path that circled the pond, enjoying the warmth of the sun on my face. On the far side of the pond, I discovered the remains of what looked like a small cabin. Just stone foundations and a crumbling chimney, nearly reclaimed by the forest. Curious, I moved closer to investigate. Among the ruins, I found a rusted metal box, half buried in the dirt. Something compelled me to dig it out and open it. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting was faded but still legible. The journal belonged to someone named Eleanor Stafford, dated 1923. I sat on a fallen log and began to read, fascinated by this unexpected connection to the past. Eleanor's entries started innocuously enough, descriptions of life at the cabin, which had been her family's hunting lodge. But as I continued reading, the entries took a darker turn. She wrote of her husband Thomas becoming increasingly erratic after returning from the Great War, of his nightmares and violent outbursts. She described how he began spending long hours alone in the forest, returning with strange symbols carved into his skin. The final entry made my blood run cold. May 12, 1923. Thomas is gone. I don't know what he found in those woods or what found him, but the man who returned last night was not my husband. His eyes, God help me, his eyes were wrong. He spoke of the singing woman, who had shown him the path between the pines. He tried to drag me into the forest with him, said she wanted to meet me. I locked myself in the root cellar until dawn. When I emerged, he was gone. I am leaving this place today. May God forgive me for abandoning him, but I fear whatever has taken him is beyond redemption. I closed the journal, my hands trembling slightly. The singing woman, the exact phenomenon I'd experienced last night, nearly 100 years later. I told myself it was just a coincidence. The forest was full of legends and ghost stories. Every old place had them. Eleanor's troubled husband had likely suffered from shell shock, and my own experience was nothing more than night sounds distorted by distance and darkness. But as I made my way back to my campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Twice I turned suddenly, certain I'd glimpsed someone following me, but there was never anyone there. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. I hiked part of the Pine Lick Trail, took photographs of wildflowers I couldn't name, and even managed to spot a white-tailed deer drinking from a stream. The exercise and sunshine improved my mood, and by the time I returned to my camp to prepare dinner, I had almost convinced myself that both my nighttime visitor and Eleanor's disturbing journal were just interesting stories with no connection to each other or to reality. As the sun began to set, I built my fire larger than the previous night and resolved to stay awake. Whether to prove to myself that I'd imagined the singing woman or to confirm her existence, I wasn't entirely sure. The twilight deepened into true darkness. The fire crackled companionably, and I kept myself occupied by reading a thriller I'd downloaded to my phone before losing signal. Hours passed without incident. My eyelids grew heavy. Just as I was considering turning in, my fire suddenly dimmed, as if an unseen hand had pressed down on the flames. They didn't extinguish completely, but shrank to mere embers, casting barely enough light to see my own hands in front of me. Then I heard it again, the singing. Closer this time, coming from the direction of the pond. The same haunting melody, beautiful yet somehow wrong, like an instrument slightly out of tune. I sat frozen, my thriller forgotten, straining to make sense of the words. They weren't in English or any language I recognized. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I found myself standing up. I grabbed my flashlight and began walking toward the sound. It was as if the singing was a physical force pulling me forward, irresistible despite my growing dread. The beam of my flashlight bounced through the trees as I made my way back to Stafford Pond. The singing grew louder, more insistent. As I approached the water's edge, my light caught a figure standing in the middle of the pond. A woman in a white dress, standing on the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. Her back was to me, long dark hair hanging down well past her waist. The singing emanated from her, filling the night air with its otherworldly melody. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice surprisingly steady despite the impossible scene before me. The singing stopped. Slowly, the figure turned to face me. I'd like to say I bravely stood my ground, that I confronted whatever supernatural entity had lured me to that pond. The truth is, when I saw her face, or rather the absence where a face should have been, I ran. I turned and sprinted back toward my campsite, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I burst into my clearing, gasping for breath, and looked back the way I'd come. Nothing followed me. Nothing that I could see, at least. I should have packed up then. Should have hiked back to my car, even in the dark. Instead, I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and huddled in my sleeping bag like a child hiding from monsters under the bed. I must have fallen asleep despite my terror, because I dreamed again of the faceless woman. In the dream, she led me through the forest to a circle of ancient pines so tall their tops disappeared into mist. In the center of the circle was a hole in the ground, not a natural depression, but a perfectly round pit of absolute darkness. She wanted me to look into it, to see what was waiting below. I woke with a strangled cry, drenched in sweat despite the cool morning air. Sunlight filtered through the tent walls again, bringing with it the chirping of birds and the false promise that nightmares couldn't possibly be real. As I emerged from my tent, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. A trail of wet footprints led from the direction of the pond directly to my tent. They stopped right at the zippered entrance. The ground there was dry now in the morning sun, but the outline of the prints was still visible in the dirt. Small, bare feet. That should have been my cue to leave, to accept that whatever was happening was beyond my understanding and potentially dangerous. But some combination of stubborn rationality and morbid curiosity kept me there. I needed to understand what was happening. I spent the morning combing through the ruins of the Stafford cabin again, searching for any additional information beyond Eleanor's journal. My efforts yielded nothing but a few rusted household items and the foundations of what had once been a home. In the afternoon, I hiked to the nearest ranger station about 4 miles from my campsite. The small wooden building was staffed by a single ranger, an older man named Frank Jenkins with leathery skin and eyes that had seen decades of these forests. When I casually asked if he knew any local history about Stafford Pond, his expression shifted subtly. "What brings you to ask about that place?" His tone was carefully neutral. I shrugged, trying to appear merely curious. "I'm camping nearby. Found some old cabin ruins. Just wondered about the story." Frank studied me for a moment, then sighed. "The Staffords haven't owned property in these parts for generations. Not since the tragedy." "Tragedy?" He nodded slowly. "Story goes that Thomas Stafford came back changed from the war, started talking about a woman in the woods who sang to him. His wife, Eleanor, disappeared one night. Thomas claimed she'd gone to the hollow pines, whatever that meant. They found him a week later, drowned in the pond. Never found Eleanor." My mouth went dry. "That's not what her journal said." Frank's eyes sharpened. "Journal?" I told him about finding Eleanor's journal, about her final entry saying she was leaving, that Thomas had disappeared. Frank shook his head. That doesn't match any account I've heard. And I've been working these woods for 30 years. He leaned forward. Look, son, where exactly are you camping? I described my location near Stafford Pond. I'd recommend moving your camp, he said firmly. That area's prone to flash flooding this time of year, not safe. His eyes told me this wasn't the real reason for his suggestion. Have you ever heard anything about a singing woman in the forest? Or something called the Hollow Pines? I asked. Frank's face closed off completely. Green Ridge has 47,000 acres of wilderness. Plenty of safe scenic spots to camp that aren't Stafford Pond. That's my professional recommendation. He stood up, clearly indicating our conversation was over. I thanked him and left, more unsettled than before. Frank's reaction confirmed that there was something to the stories, something the locals knew but wouldn't freely discuss with outsiders. On my hike back to camp, I took a different trail, one that wound higher up the ridge. From that elevation, I had a broader view of the forest below. That's when I noticed it, a perfect circle of enormous pine trees, standing noticeably taller than the surrounding forest. From above, they formed an unmistakable ring with what appeared to be a clearing in the center, the Hollow Pines. My dream hadn't been just a dream, it was a real place. I marked its location as best I could, estimating it to be about a mile north of my campsite, deeper into the untrailed wilderness. Part of me knew I should follow Frank's advice, pack up and move to a different area, or better yet, cut my trip short and return to the safety of civilization. Instead, I returned to my camp and prepared for a new expedition. I packed a day bag with water, energy bars, my compass, and Eleanor's journal. I'd use the remaining daylight hours to find the Hollow Pines. The hike was more difficult than I'd anticipated. Without established trails, I had to navigate around dense underbrush, fallen trees, and unexpected ravines. The forest seemed to grow darker and more primeval the further north I went, the trees more gnarled, the undergrowth more tangled. After about an hour of increasingly difficult hiking, I emerged onto the edge of a small clearing and stopped in my tracks. Before me stood a perfect circle of ancient pine trees, exactly as I'd seen in my dream and from the ridge. They were massive, easily over 100 feet tall, their trunks wider than any of the other trees I'd seen in the forest. They grew with unnatural precision, evenly spaced to form a perfect ring about 50 yards in diameter. The clearing inside the ring was covered in soft, dark moss that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The air was completely still. No birdsong, no insect buzzing, not even the sound of the wind in the high branches. I hesitated at the edge, suddenly reluctant to step into that silent circle. But I'd come this far. As I crossed the boundary between the normal forest and the ring of pines, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath fogged in front of me, despite it being a warm summer afternoon. I moved slowly toward the center of the clearing, scanning the ground for any sign of the pit from my dream. There was nothing obvious, just the thick carpet of dark moss. But as I reached the center, I noticed that the moss there seemed to grow in a perfect circle, slightly darker than the surrounding growth. I knelt down and tentatively pressed my hand against it. The moss gave way beneath my touch, not like solid ground, but like a thin membrane stretched over emptiness. I jerked my hand back, heart pounding. That's when the singing began again, not from any visible source but seeming to rise from the circular patch of moss itself. A siren call, beautiful and terrible, promising answers to questions I hadn't even thought to ask. I backed away, suddenly understanding Thomas Stafford's fate with perfect clarity. Whatever dwelled in this place, whatever lurked beneath that thin covering of moss, it had called to him across time and space, had driven him to madness, had eventually claimed him. And now it was calling to me. I turned to flee and found my escape blocked. She stood at the edge of the circle, the woman in white, her face still a smooth, blank expanse of skin with no features. But somehow, impossibly, she was smiling at me. I could feel her smile like a physical sensation crawling across my skin. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, terror and anger mingling in my voice. The singing from below grew louder. Harmonizing with a new sound, the woman's voice, speaking directly into my mind without passing through the air between us. "We want company, William. We have been alone so long. Eleanor left us. Thomas joined us, but one is not enough. We need more. We need you." "I'm not Thomas," I said, backing toward the opposite edge of the circle. "I don't belong here. You came to us. You heard our song. You followed. You belong here now." The moss in the center of the clearing began to bulge upward, as if something beneath it was pushing toward the surface. The singing became a chorus of voices, dozens of them twining together in that strange, discordant melody. I ran, not toward the faceless woman. I couldn't bring myself to approach her, but to the right, aiming for a gap between two of the massive pines. As I reached the boundary of the circle, invisible hands seized me, holding me in place. The air itself seemed to solidify around my limbs. The faceless woman glided toward me, her feet hovering inches above the moss. Behind her, the center of the clearing continued to bulge and shift, the moss stretching like a membrane over something struggling to be born. "You cannot leave, William. No one leaves the hollow pines once they've been chosen." In desperation, I reached into my pocket and pulled out Eleanor's journal. "She left!" I shouted, holding it up like a talisman. "Eleanor escaped you." The woman's advance faltered. A tremor passed through the unnatural stillness of the clearing. Lies. Eleanor is here. Eleanor has always been here. "No," I said, sudden understanding washing over me. "Eleanor wrote this journal. She escaped. The Eleanor you have, the one who supposedly disappeared, she's not real. You created her from Thomas's memories, his longing. A copy, not the original." A keening wail rose from the center of the clearing. The bulging moss split open, revealing not a pit as in my dream, but a writhing mass of pale, elongated limbs and half-formed faces, all recognizably human yet horribly distorted. Among them, I glimpsed a man's face, gaunt, with wild eyes and a beard that could only belong to Thomas Stafford. The faceless woman's form flickered like a bad television signal, momentarily revealing a similar mass of twisted limbs beneath her illusion of human shape. I seized the moment of confusion and hurled Eleanor's journal into the center of the clearing, directly into the writhing pit of limbs and faces. The response was immediate and terrifying, an inhuman shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a sound of such primal rage that it physically staggered me. The invisible bonds holding me weakened. I tore free and ran, crashing through the underbrush, not daring to look back. Behind me, the shrieking continued, punctuated by sounds like gigantic tree trunks splitting and falling. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, only then risking a glance over my shoulder. The forest behind me looked normal. No sign of pursuit, no faceless woman, no circle of unnaturally tall pines visible through the trees. But the sounds continued, more distant now, cracking, tearing, a cacophony of inhuman voices wailing in fury or pain. Somehow, I found my way back to my campsite. I didn't stop to gather my equipment. I grabbed only my car keys, wallet, and phone from the tent and continued running, following the trail back toward the Long Pond trailhead where I'd parked. Night was falling by the time I reached my car. As I fumbled with the keys, I looked back toward the forest. In the distance, above the tree line, a plume of what looked like black smoke rose into the twilight sky, but it moved against the wind, coiling and undulating like a living thing. I drove out of Greenridge State Forest at dangerous speeds, not slowing until I reached the interstate. I didn't stop until I was back in Baltimore, the familiar grid of city streets and the comforting presence of other humans calming my ragged nerves. In the days that followed, I scoured newspaper archives and online forums for any information about Stafford Pond or the Hollow Pines. I found very little, just a few vague references to hikers going missing in that general area over the decades, and one obscure legend about an ancient circle deep in the woods that predated European settlement. A week after my return, I received a plain manila envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was Eleanor Stafford's journal, the same one I'd thrown into the pit. The last page, the one containing her final entry, had been torn out. In its place was a new entry, written in a spidery hand I didn't recognize. They are contained, for now. The truth in these pages held power over them, but the Hollow Pines have stood since before this land had a name, and they will stand long after we are gone. What dwells beneath them sleeps but never dies. They will call again. They always call again. Do not answer. I've never returned to Green Ridge State Forest. I've taken up hiking since then, needing to prove to myself that I can still enjoy the outdoors, but I stick to popular, well-traveled trails and state parks close to major cities, places where the wilderness has been tamed, where ancient things cannot hide unnoticed for centuries. But sometimes, in the moment between wakefulness and sleep, I hear it again, that beautiful, terrible singing, calling me back to the Hollow Pines, promising that a place has been prepared for me there, among the writhing mass of limbs and faces. And in those moments, I understand why Thomas Stafford went willingly into those woods again and again, despite knowing what waited for him there. The song is not just a sound. It's a promise of belonging, of never being alone again. It would be so easy to answer, to return, to finally see what lies beneath the Hollow Pines. But I remember Eleanor's courage, her refusal, her escape, and like her, I choose to run, to live, to warn others. If you're planning a trip to Green Ridge State Forest, stick to the established trails. Don't wander north of Stafford Pond, and if you hear singing in the woods at night, beautiful, discordant singing that makes your soul ache with longing. Cover your ears. Do not listen, do not follow, do not answer. My name is Emma Morgan, and I am 29 years old. This happened in Savage River State Forest, Maryland, 3 summers ago. I've always been the adventurous type. While my friends were planning beach vacations or city getaways, I was researching backcountry trails and remote camping spots. There's something about being alone in nature that centers me. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. After my divorce from Nathan, I needed to clear my head. 6 years of marriage dissolved into bitter arguments and painful silences, culminating in finding texts between him and my former best friend. The betrayal left me hollow, and I figured the wilderness might help me find myself again. I chose Savage River State Forest in western Maryland, partly because of its remoteness and partly because I'd read about its extensive trail system that would allow me to hike for days without encountering another soul. The forest spans over 54,000 acres in Garrett County, with dense woodlands, rugged terrain, and the winding Savage River cutting through it. I'd done my research, mapped my route, and packed all the essentials. I'm an experienced hiker. I've tackled sections of the Appalachian Trail solo and spent weeks camping in national parks across the country. This trip was supposed to be therapeutic, a chance to process my grief and anger in solitude. I remember the morning I set out. The parking lot near the trailhead was empty except for my blue Subaru. The air was crisp despite it being July, with a heavy mist hanging between the trees. I shouldered my pack, double-checked my gear, and headed into the woods along the Big Savage Trail. The path started wide and well-marked, but I knew from my research that it would narrow and become more challenging as it ventured deeper into the forest. The first day was uneventful. The rhythm of hiking, the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath my boots, the steady in and out of my breath, the occasional call of a bird, had its usual calming effect. I made good time, stopping occasionally to sip water or snack on trail mix. By late afternoon, I'd reached a small clearing near Monroe Run, where I planned to make camp for the night. I pitched my tent with practiced efficiency, collected firewood, and filtered water from the stream. As the sun began to set, I sat beside my small campfire, warming a pouch of dehydrated beef stew. The shadows lengthened around me, and for the first time since leaving the trailhead, I felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't anything tangible, just a feeling of being watched that I attributed to my imagination and the natural anxiety of being alone in the wilderness. That night, I slept fitfully. The temperature dropped more than I'd expected, and strange sounds kept waking me. Not the usual forest noises of rustling leaves and scurrying creatures, but something else. Something deliberate. Twice I thought I heard footsteps circling my tent, but when I called out, there was only silence. The third time I unzipped the tent and peered outside, my headlamp cutting a weak beam through the darkness. Nothing but trees and mist. I told myself it was just woodland animals, maybe a curious deer or raccoon. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Animals don't move like that. With purpose, with patience. The second day dawned gray and chilly. I packed up quickly, eager to get moving and shake off the lingering discomfort from the night. My plan was to hike further along Big Savage Trail, then branch off onto one of the less traveled paths that would take me deeper into the forest, toward what locals called the Hollow, a secluded valley surrounded by steep ridges. As I hiked, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy that blocked much of the daylight. The trail became less defined, forcing me to check my map and compass more frequently. By midday, the mist had thickened into a light drizzle, and the temperature continued to drop. It was around 2 in the afternoon when I realized something was wrong with my GPS. The device kept showing me in different locations, sometimes miles from where I knew I was. I switched to my phone's mapping app, only to find that I had no signal. Not surprising in such remote terrain, but frustrating nonetheless. I decided to rely on my paper map and compass, tools I'd used countless times before, except they weren't working right either. According to my compass, north kept shifting. At first, I thought the device was malfunctioning, affected perhaps by some mineral deposit in the area. But when I tried to navigate by the sun, even that seemed wrong, as if the time of day didn't match the sun's position. A cold feeling spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Something was very wrong here. Still, I pushed forward. The alternative, turning back, meant at least a day's hike to reach my car, and with the weather worsening and daylight fading, I decided it would be safer to find a suitable camping spot and reassess in the morning. By late afternoon, I reached the Hollow. From the ridge above, I could see it was just as described, a small valley cushioned between steep hillsides, with what appeared to be an old, overgrown logging road cutting through it. At the center was a clearing beside a small pond, perfect for camping. I made my way down the slope carefully, the wet ground making the descent treacherous. The clearing was eerily quiet when I reached it. No bird calls, no insect chirps, not even the sound of wind through leaves. Just silence, broken only by my own breathing and the occasional drip of water from the trees. The pond's surface was perfectly still, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror. I set up camp quickly, my fingers clumsy with cold and a growing sense of dread I couldn't explain. My tent seemed flimsier than ever, a pathetic barrier against whatever was making my skin crawl. I tried to start a fire, but the damp wood refused to catch. After a frustrating hour of trying, I gave up and retreated to my tent with a cold dinner of energy bars and jerky. That night was the longest of my life. Outside, the forest came alive with sounds. Not the natural sounds of wildlife, but something else. Whispers just beyond the range of comprehension. Laughter that was almost human, but not quite. And footsteps, definitely footsteps, circling my tent throughout the night. I lay rigid in my sleeping bag, clutching my knife in one hand and my flashlight in the other. Several times, a shadow passed over the tent, too large to be an animal, too fluid to be a person. I didn't call out this time. Some primal instinct told me that drawing attention to myself would be a terrible mistake. Morning came, though you could hardly tell from the dense fog that had settled over the hollow. Everything was soaked with condensation. My tent, my sleeping bag, my clothes. I felt chilled to the bone and desperately hungry, having eaten little the night before. As I forced down another energy bar, I noticed something odd about the pond. Despite the stillness of the air, ripples were forming on its surface, emanating from the center as if something was rising from below. I watched, transfixed, as the ripples grew stronger. Then, breaking the surface with barely a splash, a hand emerged, pale, skeletal, with elongated fingers ending in sharp, blackened nails. I froze, the half-eaten bar dropping from my numb fingers. The hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder, then a head, hairless with skin stretched taut over an elongated skull. The face that turned toward me had sunken black holes where eyes should be, a slash of a mouth that opened to reveal rows of needle-like teeth, and no nose, just two slits in the center of its face. "Emma," it rasped, my name sounding obscene in its mouth. "We've been waiting for you." That broke my paralysis. I scrambled backward, abandoning my half-assembled pack and most of my gear. All I could think was, run, run, run. I bolted toward the logging road, the only clear path out of the hollow. Behind me, I heard splashing as the creature fully emerged from the pond. Its voice called after me, joined by others, the same voices I'd heard whispering outside my tent. "Emma, Emma, why are you running? We have so much to show you, so much pain to share." The logging road was muddy and treacherous, slowing my desperate flight. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing from the pond was following, but not alone. Flanking it were at least a dozen figures. Some appeared human at first glance, but moved all wrong, joints bending in impossible directions. Others were clearly not human at all, with misshapen limbs and features that seemed to shift and blur when I tried to focus on them. Leading them was a tall, gaunt figure dressed in what looked like decaying formal attire, a once fine suit now moldering and torn. His face was handsome in a cold, severe way, with pale skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that burned with an unnatural amber light. Unlike the others, he moved with grace and purpose, and the creatures around him seemed to defer to his presence. "Miss Morgan," he called, his voice cultured and pleasant, a stark contrast to the rasping of the pond creature. "There's no need to run. We've prepared a special place for you here in the hollow, a place where you'll never feel betrayal again." How did he know about Nathan's betrayal? About my pain? A fresh surge of terror gave me speed, and I raced up the logging road, desperate to reach the main trail. The fog grew thicker as I ran until I could barely see a few feet ahead. Branches whipped at my face and arms, leaving stinging scratches. My lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, but fear kept me moving. Behind me, the pursuit continued, sometimes sounding distant, sometimes terrifyingly close, as if the forest itself was bending to allow my pursuers to gain ground. I don't know how long I ran before I realized I was lost. The logging road should have connected back to the main trail within a mile or so, but I'd been running much longer than that with no sign of it. The forest around me was unfamiliar, the trees older and larger than any I'd seen before, their bark black with age and rot, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for me as I passed. I stopped, gasping for breath, trying to orient myself. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I didn't trust the silence. I pulled out my compass, desperate for direction, but the needle spun uselessly, as if there was no magnetic north to find. That's when I heard the crying, a child's sobs coming from somewhere to my right. It sounded so vulnerable, so human amid the otherworldly horror of the hollow, that my first instinct was to help. "Hello?" I called softly, moving cautiously toward the sound. "Are you hurt? I can help you." The crying led me to a small clearing where a little girl sat with her back against a tree. She was wearing a white nightgown, soiled and torn, and her dark hair hung in tangles around her face. Her shoulders shook with each sob. "Hey," I said gently, approaching slowly. "Are you lost? What's your name?" The girl's crying stopped abruptly. Slowly, she raised her head to look at me, and I stumbled backward in horror. Her face was wrong. The features were arranged as they should be. Eyes, nose, mouth, but they were too perfect, too symmetrical, like a doll's face rather than a human child's. And her eyes, they were solid black, no whites, no iris, just bottomless pits of darkness. "My name is Lily," she said, her voice sweet and childlike despite her monstrous appearance. "And you're Emma. The master told us you were coming. He says you're going to be his new bride." I turned to run, but the forest had changed again. Where moments before there had been open space, now ancient trees crowded close, their branches interlacing to form an impenetrable barrier. The only open path led deeper into the clearing, toward Lily. "Don't be afraid," she said, rising to her feet with unnatural smoothness. "The master is kind to those who obey. He only hurts the ones who try to leave." "Who is the master?" I asked, backing away until I felt tree bark against my spine. I was trying to buy time, to think of a way out. "Mr. Blackwood," Lily replied, taking a step toward me. "He's been here since before the forest. He makes the rules." She tilted her head, the movement too fluid, like a puppet on strings. "He says your husband betrayed you. Mr. Blackwood would never betray you, Emma. He keeps all his promises." The name triggered a distant memory. During my research on Savage River State Forest, I'd come across mentions of Elias Blackwood, a wealthy timber baron from the 1800s who'd established logging operations throughout western Maryland. According to local legends, he'd disappeared in these woods after the mysterious deaths of his wife and children. "Elias Blackwood died over a century ago," I said, my voice quavering. Lily's face split in a grin that was far too wide for her small face, revealing rows of sharp teeth like the pond creatures. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't die. Mr. Blackwood just changes." From behind me came the sound of breaking branches. I whirled to see the suited figure, Blackwood, emerging from between the trees. Up close, he was even more terrifying in his unnatural beauty. His skin had the translucence of fine porcelain, and beneath it, I could see not blood vessels but something dark and writhing. His amber eyes fixed on me with hungry intensity. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice like silk over steel. "How delightful to finally meet you properly. I've been watching you since you entered my forest." He gestured around him. "All of this belongs to me. Every tree, every creature, every soul that wanders too deep." As if on cue, figures emerged from the trees around us. The pond creature, the twisted, not quite humans, and others I hadn't seen before. Among them were what appeared to be ordinary people at first glance, but their vacant eyes and shambling movements revealed them as something else. Victims, I realized with horror. Previous hikers who'd vanished in these woods, now puppets to Blackwood's will. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Blackwood's smile was cold and predatory. "Company, Miss Morgan. Eternity is so very long, and I find myself in need of a companion." He reached out a pale hand toward my face. "Someone strong. Someone who understands pain and betrayal, as I do." I recoiled from his touch. "I'll never stay here with you." His expression darkened, the amber in his eyes flaring like fire. "Then you'll join my collection in another capacity." He snapped his fingers and the crowd of creatures surged forward. In desperation, I reached for my belt knife, the only weapon I had. The blade seemed pathetically small against the horrors surrounding me, but it was all I had. As the first creature reached for me, a thing that might once have been a man but now had too many joints in its limbs and a mouth that opened vertically rather than horizontally, I slashed wildly. The knife connected, and the creature shrieked, black ichor spurting from the wound. The substance burned where it touched my skin, and I cried out in pain. But the creature fell back, and I saw fear in its distorted features. They could be hurt. With renewed determination, I faced the circle of monsters. When the next one lunged, the pond creature, its wet, skeletal form surprisingly fast, I was ready. I dodged its grasping hands and drove my knife into what would be its throat on a human. More black ichor sprayed and the creature collapsed, thrashing. "Enough!" Blackwood's voice thundered with inhuman power, freezing me in place. The forest itself seemed to tremble at his rage. "I offered you dignity, Emma Morgan. Now you'll have suffering instead." He strode forward, and I found myself unable to move, bound by some invisible force. With one elegant hand, he grasped my knife wrist and squeezed. The pain was excruciating, like my bones were being crushed to powder. I screamed as the knife fell from my useless fingers. "Your pain will feed me for years," Blackwood whispered, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled of rotting leaves and stagnant water. "And when there's nothing left of you but an empty shell, you'll join my other pets." He began to drag me deeper into the woods, toward what I somehow knew would be my final destination, a place of eternal suffering. The creatures followed, a grotesque procession celebrating their master's victory. My mind raced desperately. There had to be a way out, something I was missing. As Blackwood pulled me along, I noticed something about the trees we passed. Carved into their trunks were symbols, crude, angular shapes that seemed to pulse with a faint blue light when we approached, then fade as we moved past. Blackwood noticed my gaze and smiled thinly. "Boundary markers," he explained almost conversationally. "They define the limits of my domain. Within these markers I am, well, let's just say God would not be an exaggeration. Boundary markers, limits to his power, which meant, with a sudden, desperate surge of strength born of pure survival instinct, I twisted in Blackwood's grip and kicked him hard in the knee. He wasn't expecting resistance. His grip loosened just enough for me to break free. Instead of running back the way we'd come, I darted sideways, toward where the trees were thinnest. "Stop her!" Blackwood roared, his voice shaking the forest. The creatures rushed after me, but I had a head start. I ran blindly, pushing through underbrush, scrambling over fallen logs, my only thought to find the boundary. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew closer, inhuman shrieks and the crashing of bodies through vegetation. Then, ahead, I saw it. A massive oak tree with the same angular symbol carved deep into its trunk. Beyond it, the forest looked normal, natural. No twisted trees, no unnatural silence, just ordinary Maryland woodland. I sprinted toward it with every ounce of strength I had left. Behind me, Blackwood's voice rose in a howl of rage that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. "You cannot escape me, Emma Morgan. I'll find you again." Something caught my ankle, a root or vine that moved with deliberate malice, and I went down hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. I looked back to see the root snaking up my leg, pulling me back toward the approaching horde. At their head was Blackwood, his handsome face now transformed into something monstrous, his jaw elongated to accommodate rows of jagged teeth, his eyes blazing like furnaces, his skin splitting to reveal the darkness writhing beneath. With a scream of defiance, I clawed at the ground, pulling myself forward inch by desperate inch. The boundary tree was just a few feet away now. The vine tightened around my leg, the pain almost unbearable as it cut into my flesh. 3 feet, 2 feet, 1. With a final, desperate lunge, I threw myself past the carved oak. There was a sound like glass shattering, and the vine around my leg suddenly went slack. I rolled onto my back, gasping, to see Blackwood and his creatures stopped at the boundary, unable to cross. Blackwood's face was contorted with fury, but beneath it, I saw something else. Frustration. He really couldn't cross the boundary. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice now layered with inhuman harmonics that made my ears ache. "You touch the black water, Emma. You breathe the air of the hollow. Part of you belongs to me now, and it always will. I'll wait. One day, you'll return." "Never," I spat, dragging myself further away from the boundary. His fury dissolved into a cold smile. "We'll see." He turned to the child thing, Lily. "Give her our parting gift." Before I could react, Lily darted forward to the very edge of the boundary. She couldn't cross, but she could reach just far enough to toss something toward me, a small object that landed on the ground near my hand. A carved wooden figure, simplistic but recognizable. A woman, her face a mask of agony, her body contorted in pain. "A reminder," Blackwood said, "of what awaits you when you return. And return you will, Emma Morgan. The hollow calls to all who have glimpsed its secrets." With that, he turned and walked away, his entourage of horrors following him like a grotesque court. Only Lily remained for a moment longer, her too-perfect face watching me with those bottomless black eyes. "See you soon, Emma," she said in her sweet child's voice. "I'll keep your special place ready." Then she, too, turned and skipped after her master, humming a tune that sounded disturbingly like a lullaby my mother used to sing to me. I don't know how long I lay there, trembling with exhaustion and relief. Eventually, I managed to stand, though my injured leg could barely support my weight. I left the wooden figure where it lay, afraid to touch it. It took me hours to limp back to a marked trail and another day to reach the ranger station. I told them I'd gotten lost and injured my leg on a fallen tree. They had no records of an Elias Blackwood associated with the forest, and there was no logging road or pond in the area where I claimed to have camped. When I insisted, they showed me aerial surveys and topographical maps that proved no such hollow existed. I left Maryland the next day and haven't returned since. I moved to Arizona, about as far from dense forests as I could get. I don't hike anymore, and I avoid wooded areas entirely. But sometimes, especially on cold, foggy nights, I wake to the sound of a child humming a familiar lullaby outside my window. And twice, I found small wooden carvings on my doorstep. Crude human figures, each more agonized than the last. The latest one arrived yesterday. It's different from the others. A woman holding hands with a tall, elegant man in a suit. The woman's face is carved in perfect detail. It's my face, and beneath it, scratched into my welcome mat. The hollow is waiting, Emma. I've packed my car. I'm leaving tonight, heading somewhere new, somewhere they won't find me. But deep down, I know the truth that Blackwood spoke. Part of me is still there, in the hollow, a piece of my soul that I'll never get back. And someday, I fear, it will pull me back to that damned forest, to the monsters waiting in the mist, to the eternity of suffering Blackwood promised me. If you're reading this and planning a hiking trip to Savage River State Forest, stay on the marked trails. Don't venture too deep into the woods. And if you find yourself in a fog-shrouded hollow with a still black pond at its center, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because the hollow is hungry, and Elias Blackwood always keeps his promises. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 28 years old. This happened in Savage River State Forest in western Maryland last October. I've always found comfort in solitude. The quiet paths less traveled by others have been my refuge since childhood. My therapist calls it a coping mechanism, a way to process the grief of losing my parents in that car accident when I was 19. Whatever the reason, the wilderness has always felt more like home than any apartment I've lived in. That's why when my job at the Baltimore design firm became unbearable, with its fluorescent lights, passive-aggressive emails, and the suffocating politics, I decided to take 2 weeks off for a solo hiking trip. I needed to breathe again. to remember who I was beneath the professional facade I'd constructed. I chose Savage River State Forest because it offered the perfect balance, remote enough to escape the crowds, but with established trails so I wouldn't need to worry about getting completely lost. At least, that was the plan. The first 3 days were exactly what I needed. I followed the Meadow Mountain Trail, set up camp each evening before sunset, and felt the knots in my shoulders loosen with each mile. The autumn colors were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds against the deepening blue sky. I took photos, but they couldn't capture the way the forest seemed to breathe around me, or how the scent of decaying leaves created a perfume more complex than anything sold in stores. On the 4th day, I decided to venture onto a less traveled path that branched off the main trail. According to my map, it would loop around to reconnect with my planned route while offering views of a small waterfall. The path was marked with faded blue blazes, clearly not maintained as well as the main trail, but still visible enough to follow. 3 hours in, the trail began to grow faint. The blue blazes appeared less frequently, and in some places seemed to have been deliberately scratched away. I checked my GPS, but the signal was spotty. My phone showed only 1 bar of service that flickered in and out. Still, according to my map, I should reconnect with the main trail within another mile or so. That's when I first heard the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the dry leaves, or perhaps the distant sound of water. But as I paused to drink from my canteen, I realized the sound had a cadence to it, like muttered conversations just beyond the range of comprehension. I turned slowly, scanning the woods around me, but saw nothing except trees stretching in every direction. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. "Is someone there?" The whispers stopped immediately. The forest fell into a silence so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, no scurrying chipmunks. Nothing. Just that oppressive, waiting silence. I quickened my pace, suddenly eager to reach the main trail. The path grew steeper, and I had to use my hands to steady myself on the rocky incline. My 30-pound backpack felt heavier with each step. The sun, which had been directly overhead, now seemed to be rapidly sinking toward the horizon. I checked my watch. 2:17 p.m. It shouldn't be getting dark yet, and yet the shadows were lengthening at an impossible rate. The whispers returned, louder now. They seemed to be coming from somewhere ahead of me. Despite every instinct telling me to turn back, I continued forward. The main trail had to be close. Just over this rise, perhaps. And part of me, a part I would later curse, was curious about the source of those whispers. As I crested the hill, the path opened into a small clearing. In the center stood the blackened remains of a fire pit surrounded by 5 logs positioned like seats. It looked like it had been used recently. The ashes in the pit still held the faint glow of embers, but what caught my attention wasn't the fire pit. It was the collection of small objects hanging from the branches of the surrounding trees. Dozens of them, swaying gently though there was no breeze. As I moved closer, I realized they were tiny dolls, each no bigger than my palm, made from twigs bound with hair, human hair in various colors. Some had crude faces drawn on them with what looked like dried blood. My mouth went dry. I'd read about Blair Witch, of course. Everyone in Maryland had. But I'd always thought it was just a movie, a legend. Yet here were these dolls, exactly like the ones from the stories. The whispers grew louder, no longer coming from a single direction but surrounding me completely. They seemed to be arguing now, voices rising and falling in a language I couldn't understand but that somehow felt ancient. I backed away from the clearing, nearly tripping over a root. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned to leave the way I'd come, only to find that the path had vanished. Where I'd climbed up just moments before, there was now only unbroken forest, thick with underbrush. Panic rose in my throat. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen showed no service now. The GPS was no longer functioning. I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun wildly, never settling on a direction. The sun had nearly set now, though my watch insisted it was only 2:23 p.m. Darkness was falling unnaturally fast, and with it came a bone-deep cold that cut through my hiking jacket. I needed to set up camp and build a fire, but the thought of spending the night near those dolls made my skin crawl. I chose a direction, away from the clearing, and began walking, using my flashlight to navigate through the increasingly dense woods. The beam seemed weak, barely penetrating the gloom for more than a few feet ahead. And always those whispers followed, sometimes so close they seemed to brush against my ear. After what felt like hours of walking, I found myself back at the clearing with the fire pit. It was impossible. I had walked in a straight line, had been careful not to circle back, and yet here I was again. Only now, the embers in the pit were glowing brighter, and there was a new doll hanging from the nearest branch. This one was made from my own dark brown hair I recognized from my brush, and it wore a tiny scrap of fabric that matched my red hiking jacket. That's when I saw her. Standing at the edge of the clearing was an old woman. Her skin was deeply lined, her hair a wild tangle of white that fell past her waist. She wore a dress that might once have been white but was now stained with dirt and something darker. Her feet were bare despite the cold, and her toes seemed too long, almost like roots digging into the earth. "You shouldn't be here, Emily," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic for such a withered frame. "These woods belong to Mabel Stricker." My blood went cold. I had never told anyone my name on this trip. "How do you know who I am?" She smiled, revealing teeth that were stained black. "The trees told me. They've been watching you since you entered my forest. They don't like strangers, especially ones who take without asking." "I haven't taken anything," I protested, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Haven't you?" Mabel's eyes narrowed. "Your photographs steal pieces of this place. Your breath takes our air. Your feet crush our soil." She moved closer, and I noticed that she didn't seem to walk so much as glide, her dress hiding whatever movement propelled her forward. "I'm sorry," I said, taking a step back. "I'll leave in the morning. I just need to find the trail." Mabel laughed, a sound like dry leaves crumbling. "There is no morning here unless I allow it, and there is no trail unless I will it." She gestured around us. "You're in my realm now, Emily Hall. Time and space bend to my desires." As if to illustrate her point, the darkness around us deepened, though a strange luminescence emanated from the fire pit, casting everything in a sickly green glow. The whispers grew louder, and I realized with horror that they were coming from the dolls, each one muttering in a different voice, men, women, children. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. Mabel tilted her head, considering. "It's been so long since I've had company. The hikers usually avoid my part of the forest. Something about the air here makes them uncomfortable." She chuckled. "Smart creatures, humans, their instincts serve them well. But not you. You came right to me." She circled around me, her movements fluid like water. "I could use some help. These old bones aren't what they used to be. And you're young, strong." Her cold fingers brushed against my cheek. "Pretty, too. You could stay with me, learn my ways." "I have a life," I said, flinching away from her touch. "People will look for me." "Will they?" Mabel's eyes glittered in the strange light. "Who exactly would miss you, Emily? Your colleagues who barely know your name? Your few friends from college who've moved on with their lives? That neighbor who sometimes borrows sugar but can't remember if you like coffee or tea?" She leaned closer. "You're as alone as I am. That's why you came to the woods, to embrace your solitude." Her words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. I had been isolating myself for years, pushing people away before they could leave me like my parents had. But that didn't mean I wanted to disappear. "I want to go home," I said firmly. Mabel's expression hardened. "This is home now. but I'll make you comfortable." She gestured to one of the logs around the fire pit. "Sit. Rest. You've had a long day." Despite every instinct screaming against it, I found myself moving toward the log. It was as if my body was no longer under my control. I sat, my pack still on my back, my hands gripping my trekking poles so tightly my knuckles turned white. Mabel sat across from me, the fire pit between us. She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Unwrapping it revealed a collection of bones, small ones like finger bones or perhaps those of a small animal. "Do you know the history of these woods, Emily?" she asked conversationally as she arranged the bones in a pattern within the ashes of the fire pit. I shook my head, unable to speak. This land was sacred to the people who lived here before the Europeans came. They understood its power, respected its spirits. She looked up at me. But then men with crosses and guns arrived. They saw only resources to exploit, land to claim. Mabel picked up one of the bones and held it to the light. "My family settled here in 1754. My ancestor, Elijah Stricker, built a cabin not far from where we sit now. He was a cruel man." She smiled, that same black-toothed grin. "But the forest taught him cruelty has its price." As she spoke, the embers in the fire pit began to glow brighter, small flames licking up around the bones she'd arranged there. Elijah and his sons hunted these woods, took more than they needed, wasted what they couldn't use. They cut down ancient trees for lumber they never used. They polluted the streams with their tanning chemicals. Her voice had taken on a rhythmic quality, almost like a chant. But the forest has a way of balancing accounts. The flames in the pit grew higher, dancing with unnatural colors: deep purple, acid green, burning blue. One winter night, something came out of the darkness. The records say it was a bear, driven mad by hunger, but my family knows the truth. Mabel's eyes reflected the strange fire. It was the forest itself, wearing the shape of a beast, come to collect its due. The whispers from the dolls had synchronized now, forming a chorus that seemed to accompany Mabel's story. Elijah's wife, his 3 sons, and his daughter were all taken that night. Only Elijah himself survived, though his mind was broken by what he'd witnessed. He lived another 40 years in that cabin, alone, speaking to things no one else could see. Mabel leaned forward. "I am his last descendant. I was born in that cabin 97 years ago." The flames rose higher, and in their dancing light I could almost see figures moving, human shapes writhing in agony. The forest has been patient with the modern world and its hikers, its campers, its hunters. But its patience grows thin. Mabel reached across the fire, her arm impossibly extending over the distance, and grasped my wrist. Her touch was cold as ice. It needs a new caretaker, someone to enforce its boundaries, to teach respect to those who would exploit it. "Why me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the whispers and the increasingly loud crackle of the fire. "Because you're already half in love with the solitude. Because you understand loss. Because you've been looking for a purpose." Her grip tightened. "And because you wandered into my clearing of your own free will." I tried to pull away, but her strength was supernatural. The fire leapt higher, and the dolls hanging from the trees began to sway violently, though there was no wind. "I won't stay," I said, finally finding my voice. "This isn't my place." Mabel's eyes narrowed. "You don't have a choice, Emily Hall. The forest has chosen you as my successor. I've walked these woods for nearly a century. I'm tired. It's your turn now." With surprising strength, she pulled me forward, toward the fire. I resisted, digging my heels into the ground, but it was like fighting against a force of nature. The flames reached for me, unnaturally stretching in my direction. In desperation, I swung one of my trekking poles, catching Mabel across the face. She shrieked, a sound no human throat could produce, and released my wrist. black liquid that might have been blood seeped from the gash across her cheek. "Ungrateful child," she spat. "The forest offers you eternity and you answer with violence." I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the fire pit. "I'm leaving now. Don't try to stop me." Mabel's form seemed to flicker, like a television with poor reception. For just a moment, I saw not an old woman, but something else. Something with too many limbs, with skin like bark, with a mouth that split her face from ear to ear. "You cannot leave," she said, her voice now a chorus of dozens speaking in unison. "The paths are closed to you. The forest has claimed you." As if to emphasize her point, the darkness beyond the clearing thickened, becoming an almost solid wall. The whispers from the dolls grew frantic, some pleading, others threatening. I backed away, heart pounding. There had to be a way out. There had to be. My heel struck something solid, one of the logs around the fire pit. An idea formed. I lunged forward, grabbing a burning branch from the fire. Mabel shrieked again as I thrust the flame toward her. She recoiled, her form flickering more rapidly now. "Fire," I said, understanding dawning. "You're afraid of fire." "Put that down," she hissed, her voice no longer melodic but rasping. "You don't know what you're doing." But I did. I swung the burning branch in a wide arc and the dolls nearest to me caught fire immediately. They burned with unnatural intensity, and with each one that ignited, the whispers grew louder, changing from words to screams. Mabel lunged at me, her fingers now clearly claws, her face more bark than skin. I dodged and thrust the burning branch into the center of her chest. She erupted into flames, her scream merging with those of the burning dolls. The fire spread rapidly, catching on the dry leaves that carpeted the clearing. Mabel writhed in the flames, her form shifting between woman and something other, something ancient and twisted. The dolls burned, each one shrieking as it was consumed. I should have run then, but I was transfixed by the sight. As Mabel burned, the darkness around the clearing began to recede. Through the flames, I could see glimpses of the forest beyond, normal forest with moonlight filtering through the trees. Then Mabel's burning hand shot out, grabbing my ankle. Pain seared through my leg as her touch burned through my hiking pants to the skin beneath. "If I burn," she rasped, her face now a nightmarish mask of melting features, "you burn with me. The forest must have its caretaker." I kicked free, ignoring the agony in my ankle, and staggered toward the edge of the clearing where the darkness had thinned. Behind me, the fire had become an inferno, consuming everything. The dolls, the logs, Mabel herself, who no longer looked remotely human. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I heard Mabel's voice one last time, somehow cutting through the roar of the flames. "Run, all you want, Emily Hall. The forest knows your name now. It will find you again when it needs you." I plunged into the woods, not caring which direction I went as long as it was away from that clearing. Pain shot up my leg with each step, but fear drove me onward. I ran until my lungs burned and my muscles screamed for rest. Finally, I collapsed against a tree, gulping air. Above me, the night sky was visible through the branches. Normal night sky, with stars and a half-moon providing gentle illumination. My watch read 9:47 p.m., a time that finally seemed to match the darkness around me. I checked my phone and nearly cried with relief when I saw 2 bars of service. The GPS was working again, showing my location as being about 2 miles east of the main trail. A hard hike, but not impossible, even in my condition. My ankle was badly burned, the skin red and blistered where Mabel had grabbed me. I treated it as best I could with my first aid kit, wincing as I applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped it in gauze. I spent that night huddled against the tree, jumping at every sound, clutching my flashlight like a talisman. When dawn finally came, I oriented myself using my compass, which now functioned normally, and began the painful trek back to the main trail. It took me most of the day, my progress slowed by my injured ankle and the rough terrain. When I finally reached the Meadow Mountain Trail, I could have wept with relief. I made camp early, building a much larger fire than necessary and keeping it burning all night. The next morning, I hiked out to the nearest ranger station and reported a wildfire in the woods. I claimed I'd seen smoke and flames from a distance but hadn't been near the source. When they asked about my ankle, I said I'd spilled boiling water on myself while cooking. The ranger, a kind-faced man named Jenkins, looked skeptical but didn't press the issue. He called in the fire report and insisted on driving me to the nearest urgent care center, where my burn was properly treated. The doctor said I was lucky. The burn was second degree but hadn't gone deeper. It would scar, but with proper care, I'd retain full function. I cut my trip short and returned to Baltimore, where I told friends and colleagues I'd had an accident with a campfire. No one questioned it too deeply. Solo hiking accidents aren't uncommon, but the nightmares began almost immediately. Each night I found myself back in that clearing, watching the dolls burn, hearing their screams. And always, Mabel's final words echoed. "The forest knows your name now. It will find you again when it needs you." 3 days after I returned home, I received a package in the mail. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single twig doll, bound with strands of my own hair, wearing a tiny scrap of the gauze that had wrapped my burned ankle. I burned it immediately, then booked a flight to Arizona. I reasoned that a desert might be safer than any place with dense woods. I quit my job, sold most of my possessions, and left Baltimore behind. That was 6 months ago. I've been moving ever since, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. I avoid forests completely. Even city parks make me nervous. But sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn I hear whispers. And yesterday, I found another doll on my motel room pillow. The forest is patient, and Mabel Stricker's words haunt me still. It will find me when it needs me. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're hiking in Savage River State Forest and you find a path with faded blue blazes that aren't on your map, turn back immediately. If you hear whispers among the trees, cover your ears and run. And if you meet an old woman named Mabel, don't listen to her stories. She's been waiting for a successor for a very long time. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 28 years old. This happened in Savage River State Forest in western Maryland last October. I've always found comfort in solitude. The quiet paths less traveled by others have been my refuge since childhood. My therapist calls it a coping mechanism, a way to process the grief of losing my parents in that car accident when I was 19. Whatever the reason, the wilderness has always felt more like home than any apartment I've lived in. That's why when my job at the Baltimore design firm became unbearable, with its fluorescent lights, passive-aggressive emails, and the suffocating politics, I decided to take 2 weeks off for a solo hiking trip. I needed to breathe again, to remember who I was beneath the professional facade I'd constructed. I chose Savage River State Forest because it offered the perfect balance, remote enough to escape the crowds, but with established trails so I wouldn't need to worry about getting completely lost. At least, that was the plan. The first 3 days were exactly what I needed. I followed the Meadow Mountain Trail, set up camp each evening before sunset, and felt the knots in my shoulders loosen with each mile. The autumn colors were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds against the deepening blue sky. I took photos, but they couldn't capture the way the forest seemed to breathe around me, or how the scent of decaying leaves created a perfume more complex than anything sold in stores. On the 4th day, I decided to venture onto a less traveled path that branched off the main trail. According to my map, it would loop around to reconnect with my planned route while offering views of a small waterfall. The path was marked with faded blue blazes, clearly not maintained as well as the main trail, but still visible enough to follow. 3 hours in, the trail began to grow faint. The blue blazes appeared less frequently, and in some places seemed to have been deliberately scratched away. I checked my GPS, but the signal was spotty. My phone showed only 1 bar of service that flickered in and out. Still, according to my map, I should reconnect with the main trail within another mile or so. That's when I first heard the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the dry leaves, or perhaps the distant sound of water. But as I paused to drink from my canteen, I realized the sound had a cadence to it, like muttered conversations just beyond the range of comprehension. I turned slowly, scanning the woods around me, but saw nothing except trees stretching in every direction. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. "Is someone there?" The whispers stopped immediately. The forest fell into a silence so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, no scurrying chipmunks. Nothing. Just that oppressive, waiting silence. I quickened my pace, suddenly eager to reach the main trail. The path grew steeper, and I had to use my hands to steady myself on the rocky incline. My 30-pound backpack felt heavier with each step. The sun, which had been directly overhead, now seemed to be rapidly sinking toward the horizon. I checked my watch. 2:17 p.m. It shouldn't be getting dark yet, and yet the shadows were lengthening at an impossible rate. The whispers returned, louder now. They seemed to be coming from somewhere ahead of me. Despite every instinct telling me to turn back, I continued forward. The main trail had to be close. Just over this rise. Perhaps. And part of me, a part I would later curse, was curious about the source of those whispers. As I crested the hill, the path opened into a small clearing. In the center stood the blackened remains of a fire pit surrounded by 5 logs positioned like seats. It looked like it had been used recently. The ashes in the pit still held the faint glow of embers, but what caught my attention wasn't the fire pit. It was the collection of small objects hanging from the branches of the surrounding trees. Dozens of them, swaying gently though there was no breeze. As I moved closer, I realized they were tiny dolls, each no bigger than my palm, made from twigs bound with hair, human hair in various colors. Some had crude faces drawn on them with what looked like dried blood. My mouth went dry. I'd read about Blair Witch, of course. Everyone in Maryland had. But I'd always thought it was just a movie, a legend. Yet here were these dolls, exactly like the ones from the stories. The whispers grew louder, no longer coming from a single direction but surrounding me completely. They seemed to be arguing now, voices rising and falling in a language I couldn't understand but that somehow felt ancient. I backed away from the clearing, nearly tripping over a root. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned to leave the way I'd come, only to find that the path had vanished. Where I'd climbed up just moments before, there was now only unbroken forest, thick with underbrush. Panic rose in my throat. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen showed no service now. The GPS was no longer functioning. I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun wildly, never settling on a direction. The sun had nearly set now, though my watch insisted it was only 2:23 p.m. Darkness was falling unnaturally fast, and with it came a bone-deep cold that cut through my hiking jacket. I needed to set up camp and build a fire, but the thought of spending the night near those dolls made my skin crawl. I chose a direction, away from the clearing, and began walking, using my flashlight to navigate through the increasingly dense woods. The beam seemed weak, barely penetrating the gloom for more than a few feet ahead. And always those whispers followed, sometimes so close they seemed to brush against my ear. After what felt like hours of walking, I found myself back at the clearing with the fire pit. It was impossible. I had walked in a straight line, had been careful not to circle back, and yet here I was again. Only now, the embers in the pit were glowing brighter, and there was a new doll hanging from the nearest branch. This one was made from my own dark brown hair I recognized from my brush, and it wore a tiny scrap of fabric that matched my red hiking jacket. That's when I saw her. Standing at the edge of the clearing was an old woman. Her skin was deeply lined, her hair a wild tangle of white that fell past her waist. She wore a dress that might once have been white but was now stained with dirt and something darker. Her feet were bare despite the cold, and her toes seemed too long, almost like roots digging into the earth. "You shouldn't be here, Emily," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic for such a withered frame. "These woods belong to Mabel Stricker." My blood went cold. I had never told anyone my name on this trip. "How do you know who I am?" She smiled, revealing teeth that were stained black. "The trees told me. They've been watching you since you entered my forest. They don't like strangers, especially ones who take without asking." "I haven't taken anything," I protested, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Haven't you?" Mabel's eyes narrowed. "Your photographs steal pieces of this place. Your breath takes our air. Your feet crush our soil." She moved closer, and I noticed that she didn't seem to walk so much as glide, her dress hiding whatever movement propelled her forward. "I'm sorry," I said, taking a step back. "I'll leave in the morning. I just need to find the trail." Mabel laughed, a sound like dry leaves crumbling. "There is no morning here unless I allow it, and there is no trail unless I will it." She gestured around us. "You're in my realm now, Emily Hall. Time and space bend to my desires." As if to illustrate her point, the darkness around us deepened, though a strange luminescence emanated from the fire pit, casting everything in a sickly green glow. The whispers grew louder, and I realized with horror that they were coming from the dolls, each one muttering in a different voice, men, women, children. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. Mabel tilted her head, considering. "It's been so long since I've had company. The hikers usually avoid my part of the forest. Something about the air here makes them uncomfortable." She chuckled. "Smart creatures, humans, their instincts serve them well. But not you. You came right to me." She circled around me, her movements fluid like water. "I could use some help. These old bones aren't what they used to be. And you're young, strong." Her cold fingers brushed against my cheek. "Pretty, too. You could stay with me, learn my ways." "I have a life," I said, flinching away from her touch. "People will look for me." "Will they?" Mabel's eyes glittered in the strange light. "Who exactly would miss you, Emily? Your colleagues who barely know your name? Your few friends from college who've moved on with their lives? That neighbor who sometimes borrows sugar but can't remember if you like coffee or tea?" She leaned closer. "You're as alone as I am. That's why you came to the woods, to embrace your solitude." Her words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. I had been isolating myself for years, pushing people away before they could leave me like my parents had. But that didn't mean I wanted to disappear. "I want to go home," I said firmly. Mabel's expression hardened. "This is home now, but I'll make you comfortable." She gestured to one of the logs around the fire pit. "Sit. Rest. You've had a long day." Despite every instinct screaming against it, I found myself moving toward the log. It was as if my body was no longer under my control. I sat, my pack still on my back, my hands gripping my trekking poles so tightly my knuckles turned white. Mabel sat across from me, the fire pit between us. She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Unwrapping it revealed a collection of bones, small ones like finger bones or perhaps those of a small animal. "Do you know the history of these woods, Emily?" she asked conversationally as she arranged the bones in a pattern within the ashes of the fire pit. I shook my head, unable to speak. This land was sacred to the people who lived here before the Europeans came. They understood its power, respected its spirits. She looked up at me. But then men with crosses and guns arrived. They saw only resources to exploit, land to claim. Mabel picked up one of the bones and held it to the light. "My family settled here in 1754. My ancestor, Elijah Stricker, built a cabin not far from where we sit now. He was a cruel man. She smiled, that same black-toothed grin. But the forest taught him cruelty has its price. As she spoke, the embers in the fire pit began to glow brighter, small flames licking up around the bones she'd arranged there. Elijah and his sons hunted these woods, took more than they needed, wasted what they couldn't use. They cut down ancient trees for lumber they never used. They polluted the streams with their tanning chemicals. Her voice had taken on a rhythmic quality, almost like a chant. But the forest has a way of balancing accounts. The flames in the pit grew higher, dancing with unnatural colors: deep purple, acid green, burning blue. One winter night, something came out of the darkness. The records say it was a bear, driven mad by hunger, but my family knows the truth. Mabel's eyes reflected the strange fire. It was the forest itself, wearing the shape of a beast, come to collect its due. The whispers from the dolls had synchronized now, forming a chorus that seemed to accompany Mabel's story. Elijah's wife, his 3 sons, and his daughter were all taken that night. Only Elijah himself survived, though his mind was broken by what he'd witnessed. He lived another 40 years in that cabin, alone, speaking to things no one else could see. Mabel leaned forward. I am his last descendant. I was born in that cabin 97 years ago. The flames rose higher, and in their dancing light I could almost see figures moving, human shapes writhing in agony. The forest has been patient with the modern world and its hikers, its campers, its hunters. But its patience grows thin. Mabel reached across the fire, her arm impossibly extending over the distance, and grasped my wrist. Her touch was cold as ice. It needs a new caretaker, someone to enforce its boundaries, to teach respect to those who would exploit it. Why me? I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the whispers and the increasingly loud crackle of the fire. Because you're already half in love with the solitude. Because you understand loss. Because you've been looking for a purpose. Her grip tightened. And because you wandered into my clearing of your own free will. I tried to pull away, but her strength was supernatural. The fire leapt higher, and the dolls hanging from the trees began to sway violently, though there was no wind. I won't stay, I said, finally finding my voice. This isn't my place. Mabel's eyes narrowed. You don't have a choice, Emily Hall. The forest has chosen you as my successor. I've walked these woods for nearly a century. I'm tired. It's your turn now. With surprising strength, she pulled me forward, toward the fire. I resisted, digging my heels into the ground, but it was like fighting against a force of nature. The flames reached for me, unnaturally stretching in my direction. In desperation, I swung one of my trekking poles, catching Mabel across the face. She shrieked, a sound no human throat could produce, and released my wrist. Black liquid that might have been blood seeped from the gash across her cheek. Ungrateful child, she spat. The forest offers you eternity and you answer with violence. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the fire pit. I'm leaving now. Don't try to stop me. Mabel's form seemed to flicker, like a television with poor reception. For just a moment, I saw not an old woman, but something else. Something with too many limbs, with skin like bark, with a mouth that split her face from ear to ear. You cannot leave, she said, her voice now a chorus of dozens speaking in unison. The paths are closed to you. The forest has claimed you. As if to emphasize her point, the darkness beyond the clearing thickened, becoming an almost solid wall. The whispers from the dolls grew frantic, some pleading, others threatening. I backed away, heart pounding. There had to be a way out. There had to be. My heel struck something solid, one of the logs around the fire pit. An idea formed. I lunged forward, grabbing a burning branch from the fire. Mabel shrieked again as I thrust the flame toward her. She recoiled, her form flickering more rapidly now. Fire, I said, understanding dawning. You're afraid of fire. Put that down, she hissed, her voice no longer melodic but rasping. "You don't know what you're doing." But I did. I swung the burning branch in a wide arc, and the dolls nearest to me caught fire immediately. They burned with unnatural intensity, and with each one that ignited, the whispers grew louder, changing from words to screams. Mabel lunged at me, her fingers now clearly claws, her face more bark than skin. I dodged and thrust the burning branch into the center of her chest. She erupted into flames, her scream merging with those of the burning dolls. The fire spread rapidly, catching on the dry leaves that carpeted the clearing. Mabel writhed in the flames, her form shifting between woman and something other, something ancient and twisted. The dolls burned, each one shrieking as it was consumed. I should have run then, but I was transfixed by the sight. As Mabel burned, the darkness around the clearing began to recede. Through the flames, I could see glimpses of the forest beyond, normal forest with moonlight filtering through the trees. Then Mabel's burning hand shot out, grabbing my ankle. Pain seared through my leg as her touch burned through my hiking pants to the skin beneath. "If I burn," she rasped, her face now a nightmarish mask of melting features, "you burn with me. The forest must have its caretaker." I kicked free, ignoring the agony in my ankle, and staggered toward the edge of the clearing where the darkness had thinned. Behind me, the fire had become an inferno, consuming everything. The dolls, the logs, Mabel herself, who no longer looked remotely human. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I heard Mabel's voice one last time, somehow cutting through the roar of the flames. "Run, all you want, Emily Hall. The forest knows your name now. It will find you again when it needs you." I plunged into the woods, not caring which direction I went as long as it was away from that clearing. Pain shot up my leg with each step, but fear drove me onward. I ran until my lungs burned and my muscles screamed for rest. Finally, I collapsed against a tree, gulping air. Above me, the night sky was visible through the branches. Normal night sky, with stars and a half-moon providing gentle illumination. My watch read 9:47 p.m., a time that finally seemed to match the darkness around me. I checked my phone and nearly cried with relief when I saw 2 bars of service. The GPS was working again, showing my location as being about 2 miles east of the main trail. A hard hike, but not impossible, even in my condition. My ankle was badly burned, the skin red and blistered where Mabel had grabbed me. I treated it as best I could with my first aid kit, wincing as I applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped it in gauze. I spent that night huddled against the tree, jumping at every sound, clutching my flashlight like a talisman. When dawn finally came, I oriented myself using my compass, which now functioned normally, and began the painful trek back to the main trail. It took me most of the day, my progress slowed by my injured ankle and the rough terrain. When I finally reached the Meadow Mountain Trail, I could have wept with relief. I made camp early, building a much larger fire than necessary and keeping it burning all night. The next morning, I hiked out to the nearest ranger station and reported a wildfire in the woods. I claimed I'd seen smoke and flames from a distance but hadn't been near the source. When they asked about my ankle, I said I'd spilled boiling water on myself while cooking. The ranger, a kind-faced man named Jenkins, looked skeptical but didn't press the issue. He called in the fire report and insisted on driving me to the nearest urgent care center, where my burn was properly treated. The doctor said I was lucky. The burn was second degree but hadn't gone deeper. It would scar, but with proper care, I'd retain full function. I cut my trip short and returned to Baltimore, where I told friends and colleagues I'd had an accident with a campfire. No one questioned it too deeply. Solo hiking accidents aren't uncommon, but the nightmares began almost immediately. Each night I found myself back in that clearing, watching the dolls burn, hearing their screams. And always, Mabel's final words echoed. "The forest knows your name now. It will find you again when it needs you." 3 days after I returned home, I received a package in the mail. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single twig doll, bound with strands of my own hair, wearing a tiny scrap of the gauze that had wrapped my burned ankle. I burned it immediately, then booked a flight to Arizona. I reasoned that a desert might be safer than any place with dense woods. I quit my job, sold most of my possessions, and left Baltimore behind. That was 6 months ago. I've been moving ever since, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. I avoid forests completely. Even city parks make me nervous. But sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn I hear whispers. And yesterday, I found another doll on my motel room pillow. The forest is patient, and Mabel Stricker's words haunt me still. It will find me when it needs me. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're hiking in Savage River State Forest and you find a path with faded blue blazes that aren't on your map, turn back immediately. If you hear whispers among the trees, cover your ears and run. And if you meet an old woman named Mabel, don't listen to her stories. She's been waiting for a successor for a very long time.